Hey, what's going on, everyone? It is David Palmer, the Leo King, and we are here for History in the Stars. And of course, I'm joined with Dr. Ann Wolke. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great tonight. How about you?
I wanted to give you a nice, very deserved introduction.
Well, thank you. I feel like Guinevere or Eleanor of Aquitaine with the honor.
I will always be Lancelot, so I'm excited about tonight because I know chivalry and duels, and we're also going to be going into jousting. The title's too hard to put as many things that we're kind of combining, but it's interesting how chivalry itself is connected to all these different parts of history and how it even echoes into the present. But I think, maybe at the end of this, we'll see if it still is echoing or if it's stopped. I think that's one of the interesting questions that I have in society today, is if it's been a good or a bad thing to see chivalry somewhat disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to see how, whether it's the Renaissance and art and the expression and writing, or even, I don't want to feel like we're living in medieval times, but it does feel like we're in a new form of medieval. It's like a technological medieval time where it's all check out on the phone and pick the package up at your door.
Mm-hmm.
And this loss of wholesomeness, because I feel like even though some of the subjects are pretty intense, or there's some anger and some rage and
right
and sorts, there seems to have been much more of a culture and an acknowledgement of people, even if you were on different sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was an acknowledgement that people have emotions and people do things that are unexpected.
Yeah.
Or that they need to express themselves, and they need to have forms to express themselves in ways that are not always perfectly composed. I mean, I think that in some of the pastimes we're thinking about looking at today, what we see is space being built into society to allow people to express feelings that aren't convenient and that don't fit nicely into one side or another, right? I think that's it. So we're looking at a time where there was ritual space made for anger and violence in weird ways that's not in our society now in the same way. But I think we do. I mean, maybe we'll think about the ways that we do have this in our society now, but in a much more sanitized form.
Sanitized form, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, with masks and hand sanitizer.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say sanitized, because I feel like chivalry has been sanitized out. Especially, we're going to be going into the interesting parts of jousting and duels, and I think starting at the duel part of it, because whether we're looking at it from the lens of, cowboy movies in the Old West, to especially because we've been having fun with doing the Founding Fathers and people that were part of the American Revolution, to start with the Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr duel.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time where these things were normal, that it was actually a gentleman act to sort things out, and it was a custom. It wasn't crazy. It wasn't
right.
Frowned upon. If anything, where have we gone into society to where there is the last corner about dealing with things? It's almost like we've opened up a new door that's created maybe worse scenarios. I mean, I know we haven't discussed this, but I just thought of this right now, but we've seen so many horrendous, mass shootings.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen, even just, terrorist attacks. We see all these different things throughout these last course of I would say the beginning of this 21st century that have been where it's almost like the rage and the fury that comes from individuals, if they don't, there's no place for people to kind of deal with some of their issues between others. And I think media and TV and magazines and internet and so forth over these last 30 years has really been a part that probably 100 years from now people are going to be analyzing and looking at as like, wow, that was the biggest change, of course, of human history in how we even look at culture and how we deal with personality and how we deal with love, how we deal with every cornerstone of the human psyche and how society's formed.
Yeah. As you were talking about this right now, I thought of something actually. So if we think about TV now or the media and this sort of sanitized version of human interactions that we get now, right? That I don't even know. There's a show for everything. There's a show or a movie or a series about every experience you can imagine. And it's all being perfectly presented to us so nicely and episodically, and we can get connected into these stories that are presented to us, like whether it's I can't even think of it, like the Apple TV show with the coach he's a football coach from America, and he goes to coach an English football team.
I saw the ad for that, but I haven't watched it yet.
I can't think of the name of it, but but so all of these things are you can watch a show on any part of history now, right? You can just dial it up and watch the sanitized. It's not always sanitized. Like we just watched All Quiet on the Western Front scenes, right, and that was pretty brutal, right? But it's stylized. It's presented in a story. So what I was thinking is I'm sitting here looking at the Leo King who was on reality TV. It's so like what you did on reality TV was such a blip, because a lot of times the stories on reality TV fanned the flames of any kind of rivalry between people and like tried to get the people who were on the shows to literally duel, right? It was trying
we
to
had a
get
little
those
bit of that
things.
on my show.
Did you have duels?
Yeah, there was one girl, Liz, who she was not getting along with everybody, and only one other member, Craig, was looking after her, but that's because he thought she was attractive. But the 8 of us that were left out of the 10, we were all like, we can't handle this girl. She's intentionally picking fights, getting so drunk to where, we're having to take care of her, but at the same time, like kind of acting like a dog and backed in a corner and biting at every situation. And everybody didn't know how to handle her. So I stepped up and I basically, the scenes are out there for people to watch, and I got judged by that. Being on the show True Beauty, which was about inner beauty with being punked by Ashton Kutcher and having that model type show of Tyra Banks, who was the other producer, with ABC, who only has done The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, and True Beauty as reality. That was... I learned a lot from that show, even though at the same time I thought it was not the true beauty to lie to us.
Right.
But yeah, I think it had parts of that, but it was actually, what's hidden is all of us knew something was going on. And really we were in a duel and a battle with the producers and the network while filming the show about not being told what was really happening, and having these actors thrown at us in the middle of us thinking, you're going to go on the street of Las Vegas and you're going to be a host and you're going to talk to people on the street, right? And then giving you the card, which don't look at the questions, but they have hidden cameras everywhere to see if you do. So you're tested off that. And then when you read it, the word cacophony came up, and I only know how to say that word now because of the fact that when I got on the street and the stress is under you and so forth, what? kakakakakoo, because that's such a weird word.
Right.
And it's not a word that's used in today. And so it's also your reactions to that. But then having also, once you're filmed all that, you go and you're going to have a bunch of people at what are those called when you go to a focus group with double glassed FBI windows. They don't know that we're watching their reactions to us on the street, and our reactions are being judged. If we have good beauty, like true beauty or not, like if we're cussing or if we're, going to the window and being like F you or anything like that. I passed that whole test, but and I didn't look at that's why I failed cacophony, of course, but
that's almost like the opposite of chivalry and I can't even say these words myself. Chivalric codes, right? Uh-huh. Or dueling, because at least anyone who was dueling or getting out their aggressions in that way or being tested had the code, right? That the code was printed in books so that people knew what to expect. But you were out there and they were trying to judge your true beauty
without
based
us
on
knowing.
nothing.
Correct.
Which is
with fake,
interesting.
With actual, well, they're not fake, but they were paid actors to intervene too. So some of the stuff didn't make it on the show, like walking through the casino to the next episode of We Don't Know What's Going to Happen. Mm-hmm. They'll just have somebody like bump into you, right? Like a drunk guy, but he's acting drunk, bump into you. And they have other cameramen that, but I'm looking around like, why are they filming me having this random guy bump into me? I'm like, are you okay? Like, it's about how you react. Or there was a scene where People Magazine is interviewing each one of us individually. We're not supposed to give away the secret that Penn and Teller that are at the Rio and their magic show that we were part of. And so as I'm sitting there, all these papers fall that are next to me. They had a little fishing wire pull like a little side table with papers that were next to me sitting in a director's chair, and I'm talking to People Magazine, and I just don't even pay attention. I'm just like, well, the papers fall, because I'm used to that in entertainment. Like, you don't want to stop the production or whatever, but they judge you as like the assistant's going to pick up the papers and that you're not going to help. Mm-hmm. So it's like they kind of put you in scenarios where it's like, which one's right, which one's wrong? Because the code, like you said, of being chivalrous in entertainment is don't pay attention to whatever outside is going on, stay on the interview. Mm-hmm. That's an unwritten code. So they already know that for somebody that's been in entertainment, but then they're throwing you in a position where they like pull the papers and then because I already know that the cameras are on me here, not there. So I'm just like, but they have a camera looking at me. And so a lot of it was the war or the duel between the host as well, because they were, in my perspective, in purposely picking and choosing without actually looking at what was happening of whatever the challenge was of who the victors were and who the losers were. Mm-hmm. And they were using me as like the loser who always had to pull one for the Gipper and come out. And so I had a duel with them, but I also had duels with people inside. Actually, it was massive duels. And it became so much that I was lucky that when I got kicked off the show, that it was the #1 most viewed episode of the series, and it was the only episode in which they said, we need to stop from overhearing our challenges and our pleas to stay on and go back and re-talk about it and then come back out again. And that was one of those longer episodes that got the most attention, it got the most, and I made my whole career off that show. So it's one of those things in life where I think it's like a duel, or it's like a joust, or it's like being a knight, because we're going to go into these things, where you have to not be afraid of the quest. And no matter what happens on the quest, it's how you come out of the quest and what you do with it. You don't just take the honors of the quest, you go on the next quest and the next quest and the next quest. There's not one major quest. It's our life is one major quest, but it's a bunch of amazing quests and how you continue to keep going and keep. It's kind of crazy we're even talking about. I didn't even think we would talk about that, but
well, and I didn't either. It just came to me in the moment that I was thinking about how in the past, in the times that we're looking at, people had the official way to relieve your stress and solve a vendetta with somebody, right? You can have a duel. There's this official thing you can do with the other person. You have a duel, you've got your rules. Or if we go to the Middle Ages, you can stage a whole romance with somebody that's going to be according to the chivalrous codes. Or if you're living in the 19th century, you can decide you're going to do a throwback to the Middle Ages and start embodying chivalry in the way that you dress and all of that, which was a big thing in the 19th century. But all of that has codes. And today, we really don't. I mean, I guess it's freer, right? Where we can act how we want. We have more freedom than ever, right? But we're so regimented now. And it's like we don't have codes, but you have to constantly figure it out from what you see on social media or what you see on all of these perfectly packaged shows now. So at least you were able to be in a place where you had that creative freedom, but you still didn't know what was expected, and they were making entertainment out of the fact that you didn't know the codes, you know?
Correct, but there's still an overload. And actually, I'm actually realizing this now. The code was the responsibility that your whole life will be judged after that show, especially because Facebook was out, but no Instagram, and Facebook wasn't on the phone yet. YouTube wasn't on the phone yet. The iPhone had just come out. It was like iPhone 2 because we aired May 31st, 2010, shot in October 2009 on that show. So it was when I got in a duel with Liz and I called her, "You're crazy. You've got screws that are loose in your head." I'm like, "You don't even have a loose bolt anymore. That thing left." And people didn't even understand what that meant because that's kind of an older expression of like the screws are loose in your head and right. But you know, and of course I cussed through that whole thing and I was drunk. And I haven't drank now for over 10 years. But it was one of those weird moments where 10 million people watched that show live on ABC. That was our numbers.
Wow.
At the peak of it, and was during the NBA finals. And then of course it played around the world in every major country on different networks like MTV or whatever is in Australia. They're 7 or, all these countries around the world. And so you got judged in magazines, you got judged in, back then there was shows like Talk Soup or I was on Talk Soup, I was on The Dish, on Style Network, all those kind of things were the kind of like, or Jimmy Kimmel talked crap about me on his show. Right. So it's like, and to actually go through that, there's some sort of recourse that you have to deal with of like, oh, okay. So it's like same thing, I guess, in a duel or a joust. I think more it's like a joust because the audience is there for the entertainment as much as the excitement and the thrill. It reminds me of even going back to ancient Rome and thinking of the gladiators and thinking of how it was a spectacle for these things, but they were pretty serious matters. I mean, I will never compare my reality TV matters to anything of these sorts because I was given whatever I wanted for food and drink and was staying in the best hotel room that you don't even know you can buy. At the time that ABC bought. So, but that's the interesting thing is I feel like in jousting, there's also the wanting to, or in a duel, there's a little bit of that wanting to pump yourself up and be a little bit of a performer too, like, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to get, whether it's one side or the other, to take your side too, where I feel like there's no more public and open spaces. They're on the internet now and they're all in comments and hate. And also people today just sit behind they're commenting, but they don't put anything out. Or there's this new kind of duel that we're seeing, and you and I kind of talked about it, like kind of on the internet now and these other networks, and especially in politics today, where it's like it's being said on the camera, or even looking at Rand Paul and Dr. Fauci and their little duels, right?
Yeah.
But there's still a public audience. It's these duels that are happening where people don't feel like they're getting attention from the public, where they almost force themselves into a joust that's not, nobody's showing up for the joust, it's not set up, or the duel's not set up, and that's the problem. That's I know that might have taken a little bit of time to spin into that.
No, so that's where we're headed, sort of, in our show, I think, would be to come back to where now we have dueling happening in comments or live chats. We hope we don't have a duel happening in our chat right now. But
right.
You could, but maybe that's it. Like now it's ordinary people doing all the things that we're going to talk about that elite people did back in history.
Well, yeah, and I think as we go into this first one, the duel of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, I had, when we have been talking about this one for weeks, or it was actually over a month since that one episode we talked about doing this episode, it was that first milk commercial that made me even think about that duel of Aaron Burr. And I remember,
we should have had that video
like, of
ready
course,
to go.
doing history in U.S. history, Alexander Hamilton was somebody that I knew, that was part of this revolution and in part of the founding fathers of this country, and hung out with all of the names we know. But Aaron Burr is the weirdo in the whole name list, and also the one that did really become famous for this duel in which he did kill Alexander Hamilton. And it was also in the middle of during elections. It was based off election energy. And so, but you and I have, doing our research, there's so much more to that story and who, not Alexander, but Aaron Burr was. And he's definitely the one that's way more interesting to me just because he reminds me of, I don't know why, but he reminds me of, what's his name? We did the books on him.
Edgar Allan Poe?
Edgar Allan Poe.
So you think Aaron Burr reminds you of Edgar Allan
kind
Poe?
of the dark outside, kind of, I'm going to do things like in my own kind of weird way. Like he didn't get along with everybody, like kind of Yeah,
because, I go back and forth on this one because, of course, I want to rehabilitate the historic figures that nobody likes.
Right. I agree.
And I saw the musical Hamilton, and I liked Leslie Odom Jr. I wanted to like his character. But then you sit there and you think, but this is Aaron Burr. And I keep thinking, now we know today so much more about what happens behind the scenes in politics. And we know how people's careers can be ruined by whisper campaigns or people deciding to gang up on other folks and all of that.
Right.
But Aaron Burr, he seems like he deserved it in a lot of cases to me, right? But I don't know if it's my own preconceived notions of what people should be like, but he's from a more elite background. He went to college at, I don't know if he was 13, 14. He went to college very young because he was one of those really gifted people who had to, I guess, get to college because there was nothing else to stimulate his mind. His dad or grandfather, his grandfather was a very famous, was Jonathan Edwards of this era, who was a minister and in a great revival movement. I think his dad was a president of Princeton University, or what became Princeton University. So he was pretty well connected, and he was well connected
politically too.
Right. Yeah. So he expected good treatment. He expected the best treatment. And then when he didn't get it, he went around and orchestrated things behind people's backs and switched parties, or, it's like did he have principles that he was trying to achieve, or was he more concerned about his fame? That's what I wonder.
He was an Aquarius.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, and of course his birth time is a double D on the Rodin rating, so it's not for sure. But looking at his chart now, because we did our segment on the generational astrology of the revolution. He's a Pluto in Sag, so he's one of the younger ones that was in the revolution. He was born, of course, in 1756. So it's interesting that he would have been pretty young during the revolution, right? He would have been in his 20s, early 20s. Right. And he has a very interesting aspect to me. He's got Neptune in Leo, and that was what we were seeing with Neptune and Sun oppositions in a lot of the founding fathers, and a lot of Aquarians, a lot of Pisces, a lot of Capricorns. It was almost like Neptune was their great dream, right? And for him, based off what I was reading also historically, is he really cared about his friendships and looking out for other people politically. But then at the same time, too, he also was trying to run his own show for himself. And he made a business of a water company, and then he literally did it to funnel money for his political stuff, and had a clause in there to really not do water, but to be a bank on his own. And he was kind of always in that kind of way of looking out for himself. But he had Sun trine Jupiter. And I think that's one of the most interesting aspects for him, is because Sun trine Jupiter people get away with pretty much everything. Like all the good luck, the right door opens at the right time for them. And in his case, not only did he win a duel, but he also at the same time got accused of treason and got put into the court system for that. And in our system was found not guilty of it because it wasn't constitutionally proven that he committed treason. But
Right.
He also was said to have gone during the Louisiana Purchase to try to go out there and make his own deals and trying to make his own kingdom in many weird ways. But I feel like after history has shown that actually the person who accused him of treason was working for the Spanish-Mexican government. And so he got a lot of flack that really wasn't true. So it was interesting seeing that his chart, we don't know if his moon is really here, but it looks like he does have a moon Taurus. So it is an interesting chart to me, and it's one where you have to really think of that he had a lot of good luck. He actually really cared about people a lot. He has Venus conjunct Uranus in Pisces. He's a Sun trine Jupiter in Libra with a Sun in Aquarius. And he also has his Pluto in Sag. So he was definitely a seeker and somebody who went through lots of different experiences. And he had that perfectly aspect to his Sun and his Jupiter in positive ways. So he has quite a life, but I feel like it's been underreported compared to other founding fathers. But he really wasn't a founding father, but people during that time.
Yeah, it might have been different if he hadn't killed Alexander Hamilton, probably. Right. But also,
he did fight also in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's interesting is he was overlooked for being George Washington's sidekick. I don't know the appropriate words for that, but Alexander Hamilton was picked. George Washington wanted to work with him.
Yes. And made Aaron Burr a spy in this whole Washington Spies. Aaron Burr was doing spy work because he got an injury. But he became, and that's what made him very questionable, because he was doing questionable things to get intelligence from the British and so forth. So,
but I think also, wasn't he in a whisper campaign kind of thing against George Washington? There were people trying to accuse George Washington of just not being a good general. And I mean, every time there was something like that going on, Aaron Burr was there.
I wouldn't be surprised though if maybe Aaron Burr was hanging out with Benedict Arnold. Who knows? To get intelligence though. I mean, that's what made it so weird about him. And it's really interesting in his chart, because even though Pluto is in great aspects to his Jupiter and his Sun, it is weird though, whenever you see Pluto, especially anybody with a lot of Pluto aspects, they're very focused on what they want in their life, and they're going to go through the intensities of life. They're going to go into major situations. They're not going to back away, and they're going to pick a side, and they're not going to just sit back. So he's definitely not, especially because he was in a duel.
Right. I mean, he obviously really had a political ambition. and he felt that he should be representing people politically.
Yeah.
And he wasn't able to do that in the presidency. He was He was vice president. Then he got rejected by Thomas Jefferson, who didn't want him again. And that was
back in the day where during the electorate, the runner-up became the vice president. It wasn't like people were electing president and vice president like today. That was back when whoever didn't win, who was next, became vice president. So it was like, that's how that system changed, of course. But
I think, did it change with Aaron Burr though?
It changed after Aaron Burr, but I'm just saying that back then, the runner-up, the electoral went to vice president, which actually is the way that probably is better. If you really think about it.
That would be great, because
that's the way it was done by the founding fathers.
Yeah. So you would have representation of both.
If you like him or you don't, like,
right?
It's all based off what the people wanted second becomes the vice president.
Yeah. Well, imagine today how that would go.
I think it would be a good thing.
But you'd have all these deals of, okay, well, I'll pretend like I'm running against you, and really I'm going to be vice president. And then I don't know. It's just.
Well, it would make impeachment more intense to try and get the other side, but then it would just turn into nobody ever becoming president. And I think that's why it happened. Or maybe there was talks about this incident with Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton.
Maybe.
I mean, because they both were, I mean, if you really think about it, like, they were running against each other. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Alexander Hamilton is the one who was just like goading Aaron Burr on and always knew what button to push. Maybe he just had like some kind of vendetta against Aaron Burr for his whole life or something. And I mean, I don't know, because the thing that struck me is you said that he has an aspect in his chart where doors open for him, but it seems like he gets to George Washington and that's where the doors don't open anymore. For whatever reason, George Washington's decided he doesn't really like this guy, and he chooses Alexander Hamilton instead, and that's kind of why they had this rivalry going. Then for Aaron Burr to be looked over or to be dismissed by Alexander Hamilton for when Thomas Jefferson was running for president, and Hamilton decided to support Jefferson over Aaron Burr, then I'm sure that kind of was the last straw for him, I think. I don't know. That's my sense.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I also think, though, it was what Alexander Hamilton said in the newspaper about Aaron Burr, that he was not somebody that was trustworthy in the sense of being somebody that you can trust constitutionally or as an American, that got Aaron Burr so upset. So I think of today's politics, and gosh, there's so much of that going on, right?
Yeah.
There's so much of that going on that it's one of those things that where you have to question, like, it turned into a duel over it, and they did it at 7 a.m. So I was thinking as a man, right? Like, okay, you get up in the morning before sunrise, and back then, the old school shaver, and you get on you have to button all your buttons.
Or your servant helps you do all that.
Or I guess so.
Yeah.
And then you got, you probably all night before are cleaning out your pistol, making sure that the chamber's clear, making sure that everything's right. But then more importantly, I probably would make sure that the bullet was right, because that was the days of having to still use an old flint and do all the things the old way in gunpowder. And so I think that's just a very interesting way to wake up. Like, this is the last time I'm buttoning up this shirt, possibly. And that's where you're like, wow. And also processing what you're upset about the duel about.
Yeah, this is just the weirdest thing to me. So not only are you realizing it's your last day and maybe and all of that, and you've already had talks, your seconds or the people who are negotiating with the other side for you have already talked about where you're going to meet and and the time and what type of guns and what doctors will be coming out and what other witnesses will be there and all of that. But it's been going on for weeks at that point. I don't remember actually when he insulted Aaron Burr. So
it was in 1804, so it was pretty
but
close.
But was
to
it in because July 11th was the duel?
Was the duel?
So was it in June that he? So it's been a few weeks.
I don't know. My internet's out at the moment, and yeah,
let me look at mine. Let me look.
Yeah,
but he insults him, and
it's like our whole Wi-Fi network's down right now for some reason.
Oh, I just had all my pages loaded already, so I can. I guess he can't show my pages though. Still, right?
No, my phone's got it. I don't know why my laptop won't connect to it, but.
But he'd been, since I guess we didn't say this, that Aaron Burr, when he got passed over for running for president, he instead decides he's going to run for governor of New York.
Right.
And Hamilton made a statement that he wouldn't trust, I can't remember the exact statement, but that he couldn't imagine a more wrong person for the job, basically. He tells, and it's just him telling another individual that he would be like a despicable individual for that job.
Mm-hmm.
That is what causes Burr to get so upset and then causes the duel in the first place. So Aaron Burr challenges Hamilton to a duel for this, and then Hamilton has to go along with it, right? So this is a time when it's already 1804. It's late for dueling in America.
Right.
People, it was shocking that this actually happened and that such a notable person was killed in the duel, even though that these things did happen. It was printed in newspapers, at least in a way that made it seem like it was such an unusual event that would have never happened. So it's just surprising that he went along with it, right? That they both just carried forward and there was nothing worked out.
Well, he did escape, right? And he went to Europe afterwards.
Oh, Aaron Burr?
Aaron Burr. And so and then he changed his name. He used his I think it was his wife at the time's maiden last name in Europe. He also had lots of debts too. Mm-hmm. So he would run into a lot of these weird scenarios. If you think about him in the Revolutionary War, having an injury, then entering into the spy part of it. Mm-hmm. Even Washington wrote that he had a distrust for Aaron Burr. Mm-hmm. So he's got all these distrust to where it's like it makes sense that it finally gets to 1804 when he gets on that ticket of 1800 and Jefferson's like, nah, I don't want to have him on, right? Mm-hmm. And then finally 1804 and Alexander Hamilton's like, don't trust this guy publicly in newspapers. And this guy already has lots of weird debt. He's like trying to be like, I feel like he's like trying too hard to be like others, but at the same time, like undercutting them in a weird way. But also it was said that he would always want to look out politically for his friends, but it was almost like he was not picking the right people.
Well, and also he really wasn't picking the right people because he switched parties, or he put his, it was like it was more important to him to win against Hamilton or Jefferson or whoever it was than to stay true to his party line.
Well, and that's what's interesting too, is he was raising money for the Democratic Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And that was a new party that was coming in, right? Like, because Washington was a Federalist, John Adams was a Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson was a Democrat Republican. He was the beginning of that. Mm-hmm. So that was a new party, but he wasn't liked within his own party. If Thomas Jefferson didn't want him to be on his ticket, they were in the same party, but he was also for women's rights and women's voting, Aaron Burr.
Mm-hmm.
And then
probably
he was
because he figured he could get them to vote for him.
maybe, but he also was about abolishing slavery too.
Yes, yeah.
So there's really interesting and beautiful things that he's part of with his chart being Sun trine Jupiter and Libra, and he's an Aquarius. But what an eclectic and weird individual. Whereas like Alexander Hamilton, on the other hand, is a completely, well, I have to get back on the internet, which...
Yeah, I wanted to know if you had his chart, because I'm thinking,
I
well,
do,
was it
just-
something about Alexander Hamilton that just that was bad synastry?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, I don't know if Brian, you can see if what's up with the routers, but they're...
Not red.
It's blue? This has never happened before.
It's the Aaron Burr problem.
It's the Aaron Burr problem. But Alexander Hamilton was a Capricorn, and he
Of
had Venus
course.
retrograde right at 26 Capricorn, and that's so interesting to me because that's the Pluto placement of the declaration. And from this, we don't know his exact time of birth, but we do know that for sure at midnight, he was born January 11th, 1755. So they're just 1 year apart. So he was another Pluto and Sag too, but it was weird because he definitely has a moon in Capricorn. So he's born with the sun and Saturn also conjunct his sun in Capricorn, and the moon in Capricorn, and Venus retrograde in Capricorn. So he was super Capricorn. So having an Aquarius be so different, and I feel like Alexander Hamilton being part of the, I guess you could say, the establishment of the country and the founding of it.
But he wasn't. Like, that's the funny
I
thing,
know, he
right?
really
Aaron
wasn't.
Burr was more the establishment. So on one hand, Aaron Burr would be upset that Alexander Hamilton was able to get into the position that he did, where he married into a very well-known, wealthy family, and then he is chosen in the revolution. It's like Aaron Burr had these more elite principles that weren't paying off for him. But then Alexander Hamilton got in there and then became the elite and kind of enjoyed being the elite and the one that was chosen over Aaron Burr. It's like a weird sibling rivalry or something between the two of them.
It is. And also, because they're just born a year apart, their Jupiter positions are just one off. So Burr had Jupiter in Libra, but Hamilton had Jupiter in Virgo, and that meant both of them had Sun trine Jupiters. But Jupiter's in its detriment when it's in Virgo, because that's such a very specific, small Mercury-based place, and Jupiter is a Sag and very big Jupiter space. So Jupiter doesn't like to be in Virgo. So it's really interesting that they have similar traits and they have a lot of similarities, and they have a lot of Pluto connections too. But I would say that Aaron Burr had more of the Pluto connections, and he did come across as the one that, of course, was the one who killed in the duel, the one who had the spy energy, the one who hid himself in Europe and then just moseyed on back just a couple years later back into America. And like everybody, I mean, that's a pretty big deal, like you just killed a big person. And it just blows my mind that it just was, there's Aaron Burr. And he continued in politics for a long time. It wasn't like that stopped him either.
Right. Well, he finally got Alexander Hamilton out of the way.
Yeah,
So-
and Alexander Hamilton did have a Venus retrograde in his chart close to his sun. So that's I think one of the hard parts is there's a part there where, unfortunately, Alexander Hamilton with Saturn conjunct his sun too, that's a harsh life. It's almost like his desires, they literally got stopped by a duel. And even with a Sun trine Jupiter, just like Aaron Burr, they both have Sun trine Jupiter, which to me is it is the most good luck transit anybody can be born under. But didn't work out That's weird that two people that would duel, that would be a hard one, but I would have picked Aaron Burr based off the Jupiter being in its detriment for Alexander Hamilton and with his Venus retrograde in Capricorn. And it's almost like, I feel like Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr were both doing whatever they could to get attention.
Yeah.
And that's what led to them both dueling. That they were feeling that they weren't, I mean, imagine that time. They're Pluto Sagittarius, so they were the young ones during the revolution. And so, they're trying to get all their attention and make their big mark. But it's kind of hard to live after these names, right? That come before you, like George Washington and John Adams and, even Thomas Jefferson, who is a big deal, right? And like these guys are duking it out over the vice president position, not even the top position. But Aaron Burr did run for president, and he got, I think, in fourth electorally in the 1796 election. So he had tried for president to get his name out there, though. So they both were attention seeking and trying to climb the ladder. And it was almost like, I think they looked at each other as, of course, competitors, but like competitors, like, I need that person out of my life and I will get to where I need to go. And, I kind of feel bad for both of them, but I feel even worse for Aaron Burr because if you look at the rest of his life, I mean, being accused of treason, having to go through that, and even though he's found non-guilty, at that point, nobody trusts him anymore, and he doesn't get to continue in government, and he lives the rest of his life, and he goes back to he had a lawyer firm, an attorney firm, he was a lawyer, and he kind of, then he gets married again to a younger woman who's 19 years younger than him, and she was wealthy with money because he was super in debt, and she leaves him in 3 months.
Because he kept cheating on her, right? Or something
like that. No, because he had no
think.
more money, and he
was going into debt.
He was going into debt, and she was rich, and that was the reason why that happened. And so I was just like, wow, that's kind of an interesting way to look at how, whether if you look at today's world of fame or even in politics, the people who try too hard, it kind of reminds me of Trump in a weird way too, like how Trump has Sun trine Jupiter, right? And so, like, they can get to these amazing places, but it's like how it's too much of abundance or too much of doors that open in the right direction for you. You're going to get checked on it in some place. That's one thing about Jupiter in astrology is people look at it as the ultimate benevolent, which it is, but it also at the same time, that's what brings on something like gout, or something where you eat too much candy, or you do too much, or you push too many doors. And in the case of both, it's like they get their names written in history and they're remembered for the duel that.
Well, and also, I mean, Hamilton did all the Federalist Papers. And,
yes.
So they have a lot of other things.
Well, and that's the other thing too,
but
is I think
Aaron Burr doesn't have money that he's on.
Yeah, but I think that's if you bring up the Federalist Papers, it's like Hamilton was a Federalist, and he, during the Constitutional Convention, it's like that's a big deal because he's involved with swaying the people to accept a new constitution and not the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
And becomes very popular because of that, and is part of that discussion where Aaron Burr does not get his name thrown around in that at all.
Right.
So it's kind of weird too, because that's the beginning of the party splitting, to where the Federalist Party and the Anti-Federalist Party, the Anti-Federalists, that was kind of their name. They didn't have a party name. And then the Democratic Republican Party comes out, and that's Jefferson, and he doesn't want Burr on there.
Yeah.
And that's what he's trying to be, which if you think about it, that's much more anti-federalist, And so it is kind of a weird thing, because he is kind of he's part of the revolution. He's got great things and great visions, but I don't think he knew how to deal with the right people. And even so enough to be caught up in a spy situation where he's dealing with a spy, And he was a spy himself, and he doesn't even know he's being dealt with a spy, and ends up getting caught which actually years later they find out that Aaron Burr was not treasonous, but still, like, he should have had a better radar. It's almost like his idea of how to get there, he never was good at, whether it was money or whether it was getting in the duel was probably what made it even worse for him in his life. The fact that he had to leave the country and come back, and even though there's not a lot of talk about, like, oh God, Aaron Burr's back, but I'm sure there was. I'm sure he looked over every corner. I'm sure going into Washington, D.C. was not a fun experience for somebody like that.
But still, he came back, right? And he still tried to move on, which I think is interesting also.
I can't get on
but
the
it's
internet.
almost like, I mean, I don't know why I think that's so unusual, because today we have politicians who destroy their careers constantly, and then they're back in 5 years acting like, I didn't do that. I mean, it's like that's just what politicians do.
Right.
Partly. That's why they're politicians, because they're good at not spinning the truth, but, working things around so that they look good and so that they can get votes.
Right.
And I guess, imagine being those type of people who have those favored astrological positions too, and then being able to be in the middle of the formation of a new country, and how ambitious they would have felt wanting to be the one that made their mark by starting this new republic. So of course they're going to be super competitive with each other.
Yeah, and now I got my internet back, so we
Okay.
can take a look at, I think especially the pictures kind of are an interesting look.
Also while we're getting ready to look at that, somebody had mentioned, I think Aaron Burr was Mars and Gemini.
Yeah, at the very last degree.
Is Hamilton a different Mars, or is he the same?
Hamilton's Mars was...
And would that have mattered in the duel?
Oh, well, that's a good question about the Mars. No, well, they had Mars in exact opposition. Hamilton was 28
Oh, that's so
Sag,
crazy.
and 29 Gemini was with Aaron Burr. So that's the tradition. That's an actual standoff. But of course, you'd think, well, maybe Mars and Sag would beat Mars and Gemini. But Mars and Gemini in a duel, it's about how quick you are to draw, or how quick you are to shoot, or the location, and it's about aiming to a certain spot. Mm-hmm. So Mars and Sag, to be honest with you, I don't know if the full recollection is there, but I bet you Alexander Hamilton missed completely. Mars and Sag can miss
He did on
its
purpose,
mark.
I think. I mean, that's how, I guess there are different accounts of the duel, but Hamilton went into it saying, I'm not going to shoot him. I'm going to shoot in the air. And then when he sees that I shoot in the air, he's going to shoot in the air, right? He won't shoot me. That was his strategy, I guess, and it didn't work.
Well, no, I mean, especially because of Mars and Gemini, is if they say they're going to shoot you, they're going to shoot you. And that's the whole part of a Mars and Sag that has problems, is Mars is in Jupiter's house, and so it can't ever aim in the same direction, and it can't ever think about the same thing, or it has a belief system it comes up with this identity. Oh, he won't shoot me. Right? It's like, what do you mean? You're in a duel, and you guys both shaved and got ready and got your guns ready. You think he's just not going to shoot you? And that's where, are you able to get me or no? And you're on, because we went completely out. Are you back on Wi-Fi? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, so I think you got me now, right? No? There we go. So yeah, as we look at the picture here, yeah, perfect. So this is the one that's the most famous picture.
Have you looked at the astrology for
Well,
the
it's
actual
interesting that
day,
one of
or-
them has their gun pointed up, the other one has it pointed down.
Oh.
And yeah, we'll look at the astrology of the day, but it's very interesting to me too because it looks like the winter,
And
but
it
it's
was
not.
July.
It's July.
Huh.
Right? And then the other picture that another artist had done. So of course, this was a picture of Hamilton. And this is a picture.
That's a picture of Hamilton?
Hamilton's father-in-law. Hold on.
That's Hamilton, right? Or
Oh, that's Morgan Lewis, endorsed by Hamilton, defeated Burr in the 1804 in the New York governor's election.
okay.
Yeah, he had Aaron Burr had a lot of losses, but not in Duel.
Right. Yeah.
So in this one, they're showing. I mean, it's very dramatic, of course, of showing Alexander Hamilton getting hit. But also, I think that's his problem, is he maybe was too much of an integrity place of thinking. Maybe he was a little too chivalrous, if that makes sense. Like, oh, he won't shoot me. With Mars and Sag too, like totally like. But to be honest with you, if I were to be honest, like looking at the charts, which now that we have internet back, I can show people. So Alexander Hamilton's chart. So there's that sun in Capricorn with the sun or Saturn conjunct, and Saturn's the ruler of Capricorn. So he's a very tightwad, like man. He plays by the rules, which you should have played by the rules of the duel. To be honest with you, I think that maybe that would have been said by a friend or something like, oh, he wasn't going to shoot him, but a Mars and Sag does never aim well. It's like the archer, right? Doesn't mean you
Shouldn't he
hit.
be able to?
No, the idea of the archer is its aim doesn't mean it's going to hit the target, though. It's about the idea of aiming high in life.
Okay.
It's Capricorn, though, where you actually get to that place, which is never an easy place. But Mars and Sag is not a good target hitter. That's Gemini, and that's what, ironically enough, if we were to throw on top of Alexander Hamilton's chart, because he did beat him, is Aaron Burr's chart, you can see that the Mars of Aaron Burr, which is under this high vibe right here, is 29 Gemini, in exact opposition to the Mars of Alexander Hamilton. And so Mars in Gemini is a lot better at hitting the mark, a much better marksman, and in guns too, would actually be able to hit the target exact. And let's be real, Aaron Burr did a lot of undercover spy work in the Revolutionary War. You would have had to also know how to put your gun at any minute, or hide your gun, or know how to use it really well. Mm-hmm. And he was definitely a fighter in the war. He wasn't, somebody who wasn't fighting much. He was definitely in the midst of the war. So he had a better chart overall because of his Sun trine Jupiter being within 1 degree and in better signs, whereas Jupiter within 2 degrees and in Earth signs. And with Saturn trine Jupiter, honestly, Hamilton should have never gotten into fights. And you know what? The other thing is if I go back to Alexander Hamilton, he had Mercury conjunct Mars, but with Mercury and Capricorn and Mars and Sag. So at the galactic center point, which back then it would have been a little bit, it would have been probably like 26, 27. But either way, it would have been a very weird position, especially with Chiron conjunct his Mercury. He would have thought he knew everything when really he didn't. And also he has Moon Chiron conjunct, which always is and we know this for sure because at midnight on January 11th, 1755, the moon would have been in Capricorn the whole 24 hours. So he's a Moon, Saturn, Capricorn, Moon, Saturn, Chiron, Capricorn, Moon, Saturn, Chiron, Venus retrograde Capricorn. And that's what I want to see here is when his Venus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at his progressions for Alexander Hamilton. And I'm doing this live. I didn't look this up. And I'm going to do them for July 11th, 1804, 7 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Where were they at again? They were
I was just thinking,
Were
we have
they-
to spell
were
it.
they in
Weehawken, New Jersey.
in New Jersey. That's right. And it was interesting that Alexander Hamilton was born in islands that are the old West Indies.
Yeah.
And so he was raised in a very different kind of environment, where Aaron Burr was born in New Jersey. So Alexander Hamilton's a little bit of a oddball in himself, but playing, I would say, more knew how to get everybody on the right team with him, except his opponent, by saying the wrong things to the guy who was a
Who
spy.
was a better shot.
And who was a better shot. Yeah.
I mean, you'd think he could have just said he was sorry.
It doesn't matter what the progressions. This is just the day of all days for me. Okay, so hold on.
We need to be looking at the astrology of today at the same time to see.
Well, no, here it now. Yeah, there we go. I was not July 1804. There we go. Calculate. Oh yeah. So his Venus had come direct and was finally had returned, and then he dies. And I see this with a lot of Venus retrograde people, weird situations in their life, especially things that they want to have in their life, not going well, people that have their Venus go retrograde. So look at that. His Venus returned finally to go past a place he had never gone before in 1803. And then just 1 year, 1 degree later, he's dead. With his moon in Libra, which could have been into Scorpio based off his time at midnight, I put it. Honestly, if he was born later, I wouldn't be surprised if his progressed moon was... It could have been 14 hours or 7 hours. It was at the end of Libra coming into Scorpio, no matter what. And... There's a lot here, but a lot of it is not the best for him. I hate to say it, but that Venus retrograde was his curse in Capricorn. And it's weird because we had that same Venus retrograde that Alexander Hamilton was born with in 1755 in December of 2021, right there at 26 degrees.
At the same
degree. Now, of course, back when Alexander Hamilton was born, and you look at the chart and you look at the Venus for him then, he was born 23 days before it went direct. So at 23 years old is when it came direct, and it was 17 days in the retrograde, and it went retrograde at 1 degree Aquarius. So we went through that Venus retrograde 2014 and then 2008 back. 2006 was the last time we had Venus Aquarius back into Capricorn. So kind of an interesting thing that, this would have been like, I guess, he's like a Sarah Palin. This might sound crazy, but like he's like either Aaron. Well, I would say Alexander Hamilton is kind of the weird one here. That actually maybe history made Alexander Hamilton look more like the better person because he died in the duel. Whereas maybe if the duel didn't happen, and if the election would have gone fully and all these things would have happened the way they were supposed to, Alexander Hamilton might be written in history as one of the weirdest people that would have ever came in to the government, the way he would have acted out if the duel never happened. It would have been like if Sarah Palin would have been elected vice president with John McCain. He's that odd.
Well, yeah. So you mean not just that Sarah Palin was an oddball kind of outsider, but also that she's from Alaska. She's from a completely different part of the country. And he's from a different part of the colonies, and
Yeah, and I'm also just using his to be born with a Venus retrograde, you have to be one of, if you were to think of every 18 months, Venus goes retrograde, and it goes retrograde, there's only, if you think of every 18 months out of all the people that are born, there's just this one little moment in time of when the 40 days and 40 nights of the Venus retrograde. So there's only 40 days every 18 months with people born with Venus retrograde. Very rare. So people who are born with Venus retrograde, they're different. And in his case, in Capricorn, having Saturn there, having a Chiron there, his moon, and to see it return a year before his death, and when it finally went to the space he's never felt before direct, he died.
Wow.
And I'm using Venus cycles of relating him to our time, and it's kind of crazy to see we're in the exact same Venus retrograde that we were in at the beginning of this new year. Same place that he has it when he was born. And then he also has that on the Constitution of America, which he actually did bring a different view into the Constitutional Convention. And I haven't looked too much in the history, but I'm sure Aaron Burr probably was more anti-federalist than federalist. Because it was Alexander Hamilton, it was those papers, and John Jay and why am I forgetting the other one? Not Monroe, Madison. That basically propagandized the people through those pamphlets and used Greek names to hide who they were, to get people to calm the American public down, to say, we're going to change and make a constitution. And the Federalists were fighting for a more federalist, a centralized government that was they said was necessary. And I just think it's quite interesting that he was a huge part of that, like probably one of the biggest parts. And honestly, Alexander Hamilton was not for the Bill of Rights and that were in there. That was the Anti-Federalists that got that.
Is there anything about his chart, though, that would have made him, but both Aaron Burr and Hamilton had that sense of urgency? Do you think that's just because of their younger age, their generation, or is there something else that made it so that they, Hamilton would have worked so hard on the Federalist Papers to try to get that out and to push his view out there?
I would say they're both ambitious, but Alexander Hamilton was much more skillful at his ambition in staying on getting every target in his life, except shooting, every target of his goals one step at a time, done and completed into the next, and knew how to work the system. Where I would say that Aaron Burr was somebody who knew his ambitions and had big dreams, just like Alexander Hamilton, but was sloppier about doing it and was much more of a momentary person than a planned out person. So in the moment, better in a duel, but in the duel of politics, worse.
Yeah, and that has to be frustrating because politics is all about saying the right thing at the right time to be able to get noticed, not necessarily how do you perform in the moment, right? Correct,
yeah, and that's, I think this, I actually feel kind of sad for Alexander Hamilton, but I feel worse though for Aaron Burr about his way of, I feel like he truly just wanted to shoot him because I think that was, in the moment, he thought it was a smart idea to be like, hey, I'm the better person, I won. But
probably
didn't think of, now he's not going to be on the ticket for sure,
Yeah. Just imagine over the past few years, if we'd had dueling still in our country, how many duels would there have been? We would have been dueling nonstop amongst the politicians.
And, when he was vice president of the United States, like that's the whole thing too, to kind of take in consideration is he is a vice president of the United States. And like, he's not in office because that's what he wanted. He didn't want to be vice president. That was in the days where you're vice president, you didn't make the full vote. Thomas Jefferson did. So you have Thomas Jefferson who doesn't like him and then doesn't want him to run on the ticket with him.
Right.
So he's a Pence.
Well, yeah, or imagine Hillary Clinton and Trump having to work together.
Oh, yeah, then they would end up in a duel.
They would. Oh, my gosh. Except for we don't have young politicians anymore, so maybe they would be doing, I don't know what else they do, like a game of tiddlywinks.
Well, I mean,
they
they screw each other over in bills now, or they pay off different networks now to, talk crap on them and get the media, or they pick their sides on the media and get the media to get them to interview them. You're seeing it on left and right with CNBC and MSNBC and CNN with the left and Fox News and News. What are they called again? Or
CNN and
no, I was thinking on the right.
MSNBC.
I always forget that network name. Newsmax and well, we all know that now. I just found out that the Daily Wire is getting paid by DeSantis, so makes sense now that.
So they don't duel. They duel in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, and that's what caused the duel, though.
Yeah, right, because it was printed in the newspaper. Right, the letter was in the newspaper.
And so I'm going to show the date here in a second. I'm going to pull up the chart for that date where the duel happened, because to me, it's a duel that's remembered more than a lot of duels. I mean, if you really think about it.
Right. If I think of duel, that's the only duel that comes to mind. And then I think of a lot of ideas about duels, but not the names and.
Well, and it's in the middle of an election cycle too, where the vice president is the one who shot the person who's, in the way, because no longer it's kind of like President Pierce in 1856, who's the incumbent president, who's going to the convention, and they're like, "No, we don't want you."
Right.
Right. And it's like, wait, what? So he's kind of in a moral crisis and a political crisis, because that's not a good look. People like Jefferson. He got reelected. So you're the vice president and Jefferson doesn't want you. And now Alexander Hamilton is talking crap on him in the newspaper. And it's not just like, we have to give the truth, right? It wasn't nice things. It was, do not trust this guy. He is not trustworthy for America at all.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, if you could give Trump a gun, it's Aaron Burr. You know what I mean?
Except for the media might have to look out the fake news or what, like he doesn't seem to focus so intently on an individual as his enemy, I don't think. But
that's true. I mean, he says it through using the media back at them or calling them fake news, right? But then there's this situation where Aaron Burr doesn't come back in that if you think about Alexander Hamilton being part of the Federalist Papers, that's his master skill. Right. He convinced people, and that's probably what Aaron Burr was so upset about, being a smart attorney that he was, knowing how everybody, I'm going to say fell for the Constitution Federalist spell, right? Because of these papers that's kind of the more tricky situation, is that the people didn't know because they were written in Greek with the names, right? So you didn't really know who it was.
So he's feeling like he's
doing this to me. And then everybody found out after the Constitutional Convention, it was Hamilton, it was John Jay, it was Madison, right? So it's like, oh, okay. So he knows that when people see in the newspaper, like an op-ed today, that Alexander Hamilton's saying, don't trust Aaron Burr, he is not trustworthy, Washington doesn't trust him, right? You're at a moral crisis point where if it's going to be a duel, you're going to shoot him.
Yeah.
And then I think the propaganda of Alexander Hamilton would have been like, if I die because I'm a really bad shot, you tell everybody that I wasn't going to shoot him. Because if you think about him, he's already really good at setting things up. think about that. That's pretty wild, right? Like that, like that's the kind of stuff like where we look at our politics today. It's like, this is more wild than now, if you really think about it.
Well, yeah.
Oh,
And
why did
you
it
know, the
lose
other thing is
chart?
it happens on July 11th. So
I know, and I'm trying to. I
Is
just
it-
had it, and then it just left.
that's all right. I mean, I'm wondering when the anniversary of the 4th of July comes around, do they just start thinking about like the past and it irritates them even more? Like, I went through a revolution with this guy and he still won't support me in the press, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think because the press was Alexander Hamilton's best weapon from the Federalist Papers.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's so funny that I bought an original the Federalist of 1846, and it's one of the first editions where it was like after this phase of the building of America, where it was in a Library of Congress. You know, it's a book that every Supreme Court justice would have, right? Because it also has Articles of Confederation of it and the Constitution of the United States, and the original form of it written out in a book form that people could actually read with all the Federalist Papers too, the reasoning of why we got there, and then the post-Constitutional Convention, like afterthoughts of all three of them, of why they did it, why it was so important, and their dissertation of how amazing the Constitution is in a Federalist system, but it's still a republic. Like, so it's a book that Supreme Court justices have. It's a very unique book to have. And it's funny because that book to me is very interesting because there's things I like about what they say and things I don't like, especially being an American. And if people only knew that, you know, the Articles of Confederation were like, no, there's no centralized government. Like if another state gets attacked, the other state is the neighboring friend and they help out. And the militias are the army. There is no army.
Right.
Right? And there's no taxes. And there's no, you know, like it's freedom city.
Right.
And so to a commoner at the time, it would have been like, you guys are turning into kings, you know? And they had to settle the dust of that. And so Hamilton's the master of that. So if somebody reads in the newspaper, oh yeah, Aaron Burr's bad and it's Hamilton, and now everybody loves this new form of government in Washington, 89 after the Constitutional Convention, they decide in Washington, D.C. and let the ground for the Capitol to be built and all this stuff, right? Like
Right.
It's like the propaganda is so good. And Alexander Hamilton is somebody that you see Washington and everybody in trust with, and and Aaron Burr's the vice president that Jefferson it's well known that he doesn't like him. And then boom, to get Alexander Hamilton to punch him in the face politically, to not trust him at all. And that he's dangerous to how it's Biden. Alexander Hamilton pulled a Biden, you know, don't vote Republican because they're putting democracy on, like democracy's on the ballot.
They're
Right.
domestic terrorists.
They're
Don't
domestic
vote.
terrorists.
But
So-
you know, Aaron Burr was actually involved in a secessionist movement too, where he wanted, you know, I don't remember which states to secede and form their own thing. So
Right. I remember I read parts of that. And that's why I'm saying I haven't done that investigation, but I'm pretty sure he was on the anti-federalist side of things. Which it was the anti-federalists, I have to say, that did give us the Bill of Rights. So, you know.
I think it's a time also where you had people with all those different views. It's a miracle that they even came up with a government, right? So there had been so much compromise already at that point where they came up with really the best system at the time, because could the United States have continued if it hadn't become more federalist, if it hadn't centralized a little bit more? Could it have defended itself? And so these are all things that kind of went into our original foundation. And today, I don't know. It's just hard for us to understand what it would have been like at that time, where it's still a brand new entity that people don't even know if it's going to survive.
True.
And so the honor that was at stake was my part of what I put into this brand new thing is being questioned now because this guy said I can't be trusted at
Right.
all. And he named George Washington, right? And said George Washington thinks the same thing. So I guess I would get upset too. I don't think I'd challenge someone to a duel, but
Well, I mean, I think that was, again, his only way, because looking at the 1850 elections that were through that whole 1850s, right? Like, it was about who's the stronger candidate. So they always tried, like the Whig Party always tried to make, Buchanan look weak, right? They'd show him like on a little like horse, like he's a weak, like that's how it was. It was all
Right.
about who's a stronger person. And that's why every picture of Washington going down the river and the Delaware and the flag and right? So it's like, these are these visual propaganda pieces that are put into people. And if you have Washington who's all strong, and Aaron Burr has no pictures of him looking strong,
right.
right?
Well, he never got the chance to be next to Washington in those pictures.
Well, no, I mean, and then he was a spy, so he, that's I think that's the weird thing. So on the day of July 11th, 1804, at 7 a.m. in Weehawken, New Jersey, it was a Leo rising. And what's interesting to me, it was, of course, Sun in Cancer, but Jupiter was in Libra, so this would have favored Aaron Burr with Jupiter in Libra. They both were going through their Chiron returns. And that's what's really weird is like they both got wounded from this. It's the smear forever on Aaron Burr, and it's the death forever of Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
And they both had Neptune in Leo, and the South Node was all over it, and the sun was getting ready to come into its eclipses, its South Node eclipses, like we're in right now. We just finished South Node eclipses. So it would have been a very intense period. And I think it's funny because we call them our primaries now, right? And like our primary season. So this would have been like the primaries when this happened. And it would have been in between the buildup to these eclipse energies. And Mars was at the last degree of Taurus, which that's a detriment place. So, and it's opposing Neptune, and they both have the sun energy opposing Neptune, and they both had Neptune all over the South Node all over their Neptune. So to be honest with you, they were both in really kind of desperate, delusional places. Because if you think of Alexander Hamilton, he would have been desperate enough to put that in the paper. I guess he really feared Aaron Burr of maybe because Aaron Burr was really good at knowing how to get to where he got to go. We have to remember Aaron Burr was the vice president.
Right.
So to write that about the vice president, you also have that kind of, maybe in Chivalry, you should be like, he could have wrote back into the public and said, hey, this guy's just gutting for me because he's not a vice president and I am. Mm-hmm. He doesn't know what it feels like to be a vice president.
Right.
So to me, that's, and to think of where we're at today, when Pluto comes into Pisces, which of course is going to be in the next 20 years, but this is when we don't know, it starts going into where it's all reforming and it's trying to figure itself out. And we feel like we're there now, and at Capricorn is we're kind of like going to the basics again, or trying to, or even understand what the basics are or what the rules are. But in Pisces, that's definitely a land of where, there's kind of no boundaries. And so it would have been a very interesting time where the boundaries of a duel and a vice president, like Aaron Burr didn't get put in jail or anything for it and continued on in his life. And so it reminds me, if we can go into the jousting now, because I feel like the beginning of duels are jousting, and that's where I think there's a lot more chivalry, because I said the joke to you when we came up with the idea of the show. It's like, I think it's just so funny because by the time you get to the Old West duels, it's always like you hear the woman screaming in the movies, right? Ah, you know, and it's like they're out in the middle of the street, and usually it's the deputy or a sheriff that's next in watching, and like the people watching, all the women. It's like I always laugh that the blood squirted on their white dresses, and you know, and it just doesn't become as. It's not like the women were like, "Go get him," you know. And in the pictures that we saw of Aaron Burr's duel, I didn't see any women in that picture, ironically enough.
They're all safe at home.
It's like, yeah, they're all safe at home. It's like men at 7 a.m. Oh, is that a woman? No, it looks like some young kids. Is that a dog? No. But that's the thing is in the jousting, which you're the one I found. You found some great pictures, and there's some awesome ones from back, dating 1390. And chivalry itself, I think, is something that after the Knights Templar and them having to serve a pope, having to serve their countries at the same time too for the pope, having to, serve Christ, of course, first. And it's like chivalry is born from the man who truly wants something good in his life that he sees through the feminine. That's like how the stories start. And a lot of it is from the Camelot story and King Arthur's Round Table and his knights. And that really is honestly where the term comes from, even when you look it up.
Chivalry comes from horse, yeah, or the knight.
The knights, and they always say it's from Lancelot, and even Dante quotes it in his Inferno, part of his Divine Comedy, but yeah.
Well, I don't know where to start with. Sorry. I'm not on the Wi-Fi? Uh-oh.
But that's where I think it's an interesting line of where we're at now. I hate to say it, but it's like people, Brian and I play Call of Duty. So it's like in video games now. And when you get in the room, sometimes there's, 12 people, sometimes there's 20 or more. But all you hear when you're on a team and the other team wins, you just hear you don't even see these people either. And it's just like every bad word you could think of in there. I can't even say the words on here. Every just like, fuck you, just blah, 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 you're a weak ass. It's crazy. Like that's all it is. That's where it's at now. It's like how well I shot, how many times I got not killed, and I killed that many people in the game and you didn't. And like the scores.
It sounds very Aaron Burr-ish.
Right. But it's funny because you don't see the person unless you're on Discord, which you would run like a webcam, and that's usually for just people who go into your own server, and that's usually your friends. So still, it's not like the people you're playing against are seeing you play.
Right. Yeah, we have a lot of that anonymous dueling in our society now, right? Where it's in the comments also of everything.
Right.
You can anonymously attack people.
Yeah, or make bot accounts or fake accounts. Or
attack people on Twitter.
Right.
And then, talk about a chivalrous thing, right? Like an idea of chivalry. Elon Musk will come in and save us. We really do have sort of this chivalrous idea still that there is going to be someone who will come and save us. I don't know if that's chivalry or like a Messiah thing or whatever it is, but that's kind of how chivalry gets spun out now. But how it was originally was a really elite idea of romance and love.
Correct.
That came from a tradition that was Roman, that kind of glamorized this idea that you could become lovesick because you loved somebody so much. And I guess it's kind of this idea that you'll do anything for them because you love them so much. And it got applied then to elite women, or it got used to kind of target elite women, such as Eleanor of Aquitaine, a queen who has all of this land, and you want to attract her. And that's where a lot of chivalrous literature was being written, was in that era of the Middle Ages. But then it kind of develops also into this weird romantic story that's all about a man trying to get a woman that he can't really have because she's married, usually, in the chivalrous stories. So it's like a forbidden romance in a sense.
Right.
But more romantic. And I mean, really, that's because in the Middle Ages, and especially with the elite women or with a queen, marriage wasn't done because of love. It was just a contract. It was bringing two kingdoms together or uniting land and territory or families.
For gain of political power or even maybe economic, or wanting to end a war.
Yeah.
Or wanting to start a war too, like in many ways. Like there's a lot of, and they're betrothed usually at such a young age they don't even know. And then they get older and just have to accept it.
Right, but we're going to talk about Henry VIII because he actually used, he was excited about chivalry, and it kind of helped him look at his life through the lens of love, his love of chivalry. But we'll talk about that.
And he was obsessed with the Camelot story.
Yeah, he was.
Which you were just bringing up the idea of like the woman that can't be had because she's married. And this picture is Lancelot talking with Guinevere, and there's King Arthur in the background, wondering.
He's like scratching his beard.
Like scratching his beard. What's going on? But and this is where Dante puts in Inferno, which refers to hell, as he closes the book of him thinking about a woman who's betrothed to somebody else as going to hell, or that it leads to hell too. And so I think when you think of romance and chivalry, when you think of the Aaron Burr situation with Hamilton, there's no romance involved.
No.
Right? But there's also that code of honor of chivalry where, it's not so much about killing other people or something, but it's about the marks of being a good gentleman. It's really the beginning of what a gentleman would be in many aspects, the core of being a good knight or a good man or a good, way of respecting another man too. But at the same time, it's the beginning of whether it's jousting or whether it's how well you do your quest, right? Because Lancelot does go on the quest for the Holy Grail, or he does take on all the quests of Camelot. He is the Black Knight. He is the Dragon Slayer. He is the one that can do the things that every man can't do. He also is the one that saves Guinevere when King Arthur sets to burn her because he thinks that her twin sister somehow tricked him, and now he was with her twin sister, so he puts his own wife to be burned, and Lancelot knows it's not true and saves her and takes her away, and that's where they fall in love, basically, and then they have to come back because they have nothing else besides Camelot in this kingdom. And it's also interesting that Lancelot's French. He's Lancelot of Fond du Lac, so it's interesting that they have got that French love connection, which you always, it doesn't matter which English movie you watch, it's always the French women or the French that know how to make love. I think in Braveheart of the scene, and that's really like medieval, like even, I guess, what time would that be when it's in the late 1200s and the early 1300s?
Yeah, medieval.
Where they show the best friend of the princess of the Longshanks, Edward the Third, I think it was, right?
Edward Longshanks.
and his son, and he was married to a French princess, and her girlfriend's just like, oh, I was slept with one of the English, military commanders, and I got the info about what William Wallace, how he he went after and killed everybody in the town because they came after his woman and all that. And long story short, she's like, how'd you find that? Oh, well, through his tongue, but he doesn't know how to use it. So it's like, there was a lot of that going around of French women, the French love mixed with the English chivalrous knight. It was like the combo of French English, and where you even get the fleur de lis is a big part of what kind of comes through the Knights Templar, and this idea of like being for this not only higher purpose of God, but higher purpose of being a man, a higher purpose of being chivalrous. And that's why that story is the story that even Henry VIII looks after, because it's also the way that you conduct yourself. Like the fair ladies, like if you look at this picture, and Lancelot going up to see Guinevere in this picture, there's all the energy of how you are a regal man and a man of, honor, and a man of honoring a woman too. That was the other thing, is a lot of women weren't being honored. So to be chivalrous was to honor a lady. But I think it's a two-way street with chivalry and romance. It's men and women like respecting each other,
Yeah, it's there has to be a response. If someone's going to be offering love, the other person's got to be accepting it and playing the game too. And the whole chivalric code really is a French literary tradition. And so of course that's why it's French. But I was thinking, by the time it gets to Henry VIII, it has become more combined with the older stories of King Arthur as well. But by the time in the Middle Ages already, those ideas were they did become their own code. By how are women supposed to respond? How are men supposed to offer love? And even though it was an elite idea, that it would be very wealthy women who are, I guess, worth trying to pursue with chivalry. It actually also, I was going to say that it is connected to religion, because the idea that you have a woman who is worthy of receiving all of that love was sort of like the Virgin Mary as well. It was like this idealized love that you would have found within the church as well. If you were a knight and you're going on a quest, or you're going to the Holy Land, and you're serving the Pope in that way, the woman is sort of standing in as the Virgin Mary representative, who you're also giving her your allegiance and honoring her for everything that the Virgin Mary had given as well. So it's wrapped up in a lot of religious ideology too, but it becomes secular and somehow also connected to adulterous situations too. But
very much so. But I think that you said it best with that, the religious aspect of how a lady would be looked at as something that is beautiful, like a Mary energy, or something that is worth. And I always think of this picture as, is it working or no?
Oh, well, we'll have to turn our things to the camera.
Oh, hold on. You're online? Man, you're sure it says it's connected on Wi-Fi? Well, I'm reconnecting now. It's so weird. I don't know what happened to our whole network here. Or why it's... Come on. Just a little break would be nice. I guess that's where, you have to be chivalrous even in the middle of a show, right? There's something about responsibility with chivalry. There's something about respect. There's something about, especially when it came to jousting, or even when, there was playing with swords, they would round the swords off. You would never hit below the belt. That's where that whole expression comes from. And even in jousting, there was a proper way of doing it, right? You of course did it, but there was a way of, you dressed the part, you showed up as the part, and you represented on your shield, and you also represented the kind of energy of who you are, of how you handled the aftermath of the joust. So if you were to come across screaming afterwards, you would, everybody would judge you as you're,
exactly.
It was a way of, hey, this is what happened and you're going to have to deal with it.
Well, I mean, what I think is fascinating is how kings were participating in jousts, right?
Right.
And that's part of your manliness is whether you can get out there and put on all the equipment and participate in the joust and do it in the correct way, and stage an elaborate festival where you would have all the knights come and participate in jousting and different tournaments. But to have the king actually go out and do that too is
very rare.
That would never happen anymore, right? We don't see the rulers getting out and participating in those sorts of things. But the other thing I think is funny is that they really participated because there were kings who died jousting. King Henry II in France, who was Catherine de Medici's husband, and he had a lance go into his helmet and poke his eye or go into his head and kill him. And Henry VIII also had an accident very similar to that, where he was jousting, and even the guy who was going against him, I can't remember who it was, one of the dukes, Duke of Suffolk or somebody, who was riding up against Henry VIII, and it was supposed to be just sort of a trial. Henry still had his face mask up, and I don't know, there was a miscommunication or something, because imagine riding towards Henry VIII of all kings, and you're accidentally wait, stop, no, don't go, his face is not ready. The guy doesn't hear him, and he hits him off of his horse. But that was when he was younger, that's 1524, and he got right back up.
But it also, he had that wound from a bad accident in a joust.
But later,
yeah. And then it's said that that's what caused him to gain so much weight, and also
all
got
sorts of
very
problems.
cranky. And
there's been new research that that's why he had that turn of events in his life. That's why he that was in 1536, I think. Wanted to make sure on the date. Where he's with Anne Boleyn at that point. Catherine of Aragon had just died, and he was going to have a very festive occasion where he didn't have to worry about having a divorced wife around. He's got this new wife, Anne Boleyn, who's pregnant, and she had already had a girl child. She's pregnant again, so there's hope that he's going to have a male heir. So he has this jousting tournament, and he falls off of his horse in that one. He was out of it for, I think, 2 hours. He couldn't talk. And after that, actually, Anne Boleyn was told he was going to die. And 2 days later, she had a miscarriage, and it was a boy child. So, yeah, he was never the same after that. that he
No.
they say that his frontal lobe was injured in that, and it probably changed the way he responded to people, and it changed his anger, or it made him more apt to be angry, because when he was forming that relationship with Anne Boleyn, talking about somebody who was French, right? We talked about how Anne Boleyn was French influenced before.
Right.
She's raised in the French court. So she knew all about the courtly rituals of courtly love, right?
Right.
She would participate in that with Henry. Henry, I guess that was a flip, though. Henry was married, and he's seducing his mistress with chivalry. And Anne Boleyn was responding in the appropriate, chaste ways, where she was just sort of letting him know she's interested, but not going all the way. And everything was nice and romantic, right? It was the whole idea of the poetry that he would have been reading. And he loved all of that. He was actually raised to love all that because the Tudor family embraced that tradition.
And you had told me they embraced Camelot's story and the story of King Arthur. And
right. Well, for some reason.
And it's funny that it's not really King Arthur that's known about the chivalry, you know. That's the whole
it is
weird
funny.
part. Everybody has their part, whether it's the magic of Merlin or whether it's King Arthur and how Excalibur that creates Camelot and he becomes this powerful king. But it's really this weird story of Lancelot, his greatest knight on the Round Table, and the quests and the adventures that King Arthur sends him on, but also his love for Guinevere that she has for him, and that chivalry's taught through a story of that, which I think maybe he liked that because it was like he felt like maybe he was Lancelot even though he was the king, of like the chase of something that made him want to be better, because of course he married the widow of his brother, right? So
right, but that was even a very chivalrous thing to do for him, because his brother dies
At
young,
first.
and so he decides, I'm going to take, like immediately, he was still young. He could have had any woman in Europe, right? But he decides, I'm going to take my brother's wife because this woman came all the way from Spain, and I'm going to do the right thing and marry her. And
because his father is what gives the Tudor name its name, Henry the Seventh. And the Henry line itself is like one of the long lines that, you know, you're taking, but it was that Tudor line that starts with his father.
Yeah. So when his father became king, and we don't have, I can't use pictures, right, Brian? We're not, okay.
You don't have me back up. I just redid everything, reconnected.
Well, then we will.
Have you tried just deleting that remote cam and then adding it again? Have you tried using the other remote cam, like the one for Mac Mini, maybe? There's none are there?
Well, I was going to talk about the round table, but so I'll just talk about Henry the Seventh. When he became king, it was at the end of the Wars of the Roses, and he defeated Richard III in the battlefield. And what's interesting is that year was 1485 when that happened, and that's the same year that the death of Arthur came out. Thomas Mallory's book about King Arthur came out that same year. And so Henry VII embraced that whole Arthurian story because he was basically a usurping monarch. I mean, he had connections to the throne, but that were not as direct as other people who stood in line to inherit the throne. So he defeated Richard III, became king, and then in order to establish their shaky claim to the throne, that's why they embraced all the Arthurian stuff. And they tried to identify their family with that legend. So, of course, he names his child Arthur, right? And he also, his first child, right? So the king was supposed to be Arthur. The second Tudor king should have been named Arthur, but it was Henry instead. But he also had a a table that was put up in Winchester. So in the English tradition, Winchester is, or in their tradition, what they understood, Winchester would have been Camelot. And so they made sure actually that Arthur was born in Winchester, and they had a pseudo round table that was painted with all of the names of the knights around it. It's probably highly unlikely that it was the actual round table, but it's painted to look like that. And I think I showed a picture of that to you before, at least, right? That it's got the Tudor rose in the middle of it. That's the white and red rose. And it has King Arthur right at the top on one section of it. So they are really embracing that myth in order to connect their family to the ancient English past. And then Henry himself was raised to love this chivalrous tradition.
Right.
So that even, he played that chivalry game with Anne Boleyn. But then it kind of turned on her because she could be flirtatious with him, and that worked when she wasn't married to him. But when they're married, there's not a chivalry story for that, right? It's all about someone you can't obtain.
She did become somewhat of a threat to him too. That she couldn't be trusted and
right. And that's whether or not she could or not, or it was his head injury or whatever.
Her father became a lord and he was given so much titles and land.
Yeah.
So it was like, and they always say he was the bad guy. But I always look at it like, you do all this. I mean, the only way that he could even be with her is he had to secede and make the schism from the Catholic Church, which was earth-shattering to this day. Like literally probably one of the most shattering moments of the last 2,000 years. The first monarch to say, nope, we're done. Bye. And I'm making my own church. And to clean all those Catholic, what were they called? The Catholics had all their...
monasteries?
Well, it was the monasteries, but they also took their money from there. I guess it was their monasteries. Yeah. And to then clean all those out and then turn them all into King of England or the Church of England.
So how chivalrous is that? That's what's so funny is that...
That's the ultimate chivalry. You're leaving the Catholic Church and starting another church so you can get an annulment. It's for and then so you can marry you. Mm-hmm. And then I'm giving your father everything and turning him into a lord. And he was playing... her father was also involved in like grooming her to be this way. So he could be seen as the king real, like in good eyes.
Right.
And then she's out flirting with other people when they get married. But he also goes through his jousting accident. Mm-hmm. And so he's even trying to impress her through jousting. Gets in the accident. And now he's wounded from it. And doesn't want to go ride out to the countryside like he used to do, or do like he used to be like into sports, but he'd hang out with his knights and he would play cards and throw dice. So he was a guy who liked to entertain. He liked to entertain on his court. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like she just kind of was like, I got everything now.
I mean, there's a historian who talks about how she was continuing to act in the way that she was taught to act, which was flirtatious with the king, right? But she was acting that way with other men, and that's what would have made her look like, why are you flirting with all of these other men, right?
And that's where it's a two-way street with the chivalry. Mm-hmm. He went through everything. It wasn't like he was cheating on her.
But she didn't get the memo. She didn't know how to respond. I think it's kind of like in the marriage, it all breaks down, or at least she didn't get it. But it's sort of like it was his code that he used to figure out what woman was he actually going to be with next after he got rid of Anne.
But that's after.
Right.
And after and her disinterest in flirting with other men and all that he did and all that, I mean, that I know Lancelot did a lot, but not compared to Henry VIII.
Well,
and so that's where it's said in this one book I have that the chivalry story and the romance story is also connected to the great tears that come from it too, whether it's Romeo and Juliet, right? Like there's something about the tragedy to it at the same time, which is why women love romance novels so much, and they're always, it's like the covers are so like, sensual and sexual, but then there's always like the third guy in the back of the picture or, like all that kind of weird, tragedy that comes in.
Yeah, they're all like sort of the star-crossed love stories or the tragic, unobtainable love story. There's something in the way of their having the pure love, right?
Yeah, and I guess in the story too, I mean, because it's kind of hard. It's not like Henry, went to battle with another man over Anne Boleyn or even his first wife. But the weird thing about it is it's like he doesn't have a man to go after or a joust to go after or a duel to go after, right? So there's something where it's like when it's like, in his case, it wasn't like he was going after the joust because he was upset with somebody. It was just he wanted to show that he was a king that was a powerful king, because Henry V was known as the warrior king, the military king,
right?
In his quest of going to France and killing a lot of people, but he was on the battlefield, and he actually rallied up the troops, all the knights and all the men, and had a famous speech on the way to France, like that was really incredible. And
on St. Crispin's Day.
Yeah. So he has a lot to follow in his name, a lot to follow in his family. So jousting would have been the closest to it, because that was more of a time of, he's getting along with France, and now he has a French queen that he takes on. So there's some,
or Spanish, or are you talking about Henry V?
I'm talking about Henry VIII again.
Oh,
now,
yeah,
right. Like
he has a
it's more peaceful than usual.
Yeah,
and so that's where, if I think of today's world, right, the utopian society of ultimate peace is probably what leads to always the most craziest things. That there's something about astrology with Mars and Aries being war, and it's the first sign. There's something weird about how every big turning of history is about a big war or a big schism, which would be like a duel, but it's kind of not a duel. Like it's just an opposing force that is either drifting away or coming together, which is like how romance works, right?
Right.
It's like another way of looking at that. And that's the weird dualistic nature of a duel or a joust, or even Henry VIII leaving the Catholic Church, which would have been unheard of or even unthought of.
That's really interesting that you made that connection, because also, like in 1390, when, I believe it's 1390, when Eleanor of Aquitaine is the queen who is wooed into England, she comes with all of this land that is able, so England's now able to claim large parts of French territory. And that's when the chivalry stuff really takes off. So again, because it was this huge project to bring in this woman who's very wealthy, so the king's got to seduce her in, or use honor, I guess,
right,
and to try to woo her to England. But then by the time you get to the Reformation, it's the opposite part of the story of, now it's the tragedy where England, or Henry could have made it or depicted it as the king did us wrong. Or not the king, the Pope. The Pope wasn't treating us properly, right? We were being taken advantage of. And so now we need to be saved. Like he needed to save the church from the corruption of the Roman Catholic Pope, right?
Which was recorded in the prior monarchs before him, because in the book I have of the Schism,
Right.
it's the half the book is logs of everything that the Catholic Church and the popes and the bishops and the cardinals that were connected to England were doing over hundreds of years of time. The list is insane. And how much political money, even stealing of women, like all those kind of things. So the Church of England was like also an idea that was more, I think, than just to get a woman. It was also something that the monarchs prior to him, his father, and of course it all got weird before his father. Kind of went weird with a lot of different monarchs to get from Henry V after that. Kind of gets weird.
Yeah.
But it's like it was still being recorded. And so he, in many ways, is being chivalrous to the country. There's that whole chivalry of your country, your chivalry of God, your chivalry to a woman. It's like an all around, like, where can I be the best and the greatest that I can be everywhere I can be? And we see that that's what women after this pandemic have come back to with men. There were so many posts over the last 2 years, right, of women just like, I want a guy wants to go get some land, who just wants to go have some kids, wants to be a protector again, that's not wearing a mask. I couldn't believe how many posts over the last 2 years are memes. They were just, especially in 2021 and 2020, it was just nonstop. That's all you saw women posting about. That it's like, it finally came back around through a pandemic, right? So it's like, whether it was plagues, and Henry VIII was around during the plague too.
Yeah, there were plagues all the time.
I know, he stayed in the
18th
castle
century.
and didn't leave for like a year or something like that. And that's like the interesting part of it all, is like these big turn of events have a lot of things that bring us back to chivalry in a way. It's like chivalry has been lost for a long time, because I think modern wise, it's been the cool CEO who has, it's like the Andrew Tate situation. He's not chivalrous at all. He treats women like crap. And then men like him, and it's like because he's got sunglasses next to a boat all the time, and he's knows how to make a lot of money. And like,
But
that's
doesn't
not.
he have a code of like how he does it, or am I wrong? Like, does he have some kind of a program that you can learn?
Right, and it's of course being a strong man and protecting your woman, but there's also him calling women like not smart enough or not good enough at certain things, and I don't even want to get into his whole thing.
But that's the part that's gone, right? Is, I mean, I think a lot of times these ideas get critiqued as being, I don't know, this might be too dangerous to say something like this.
Ooh, say it, Anne.
But it could be seen as too like anti-feminist, right? To be
correct
into chivalry. But the thing is that I'm always trying to say this with my students, because we like to tell these stories of women always being victimized, right? So we'll tell the story, and actually there are some pretty horrible ways women were treated in some of these medieval troubadour tales type of things, right? But the idea of the pure chivalrous code was that there is this arrangement, and it's about honor on both sides. There's an obligation on both sides. And it's that's what the argument would have been for someone like Henry VIII. If you need to leave the church, it's because the church isn't fulfilling its side of the duty also.
Right.
Because you had said something like this earlier, that it goes both ways, that it's not just the guys doing all this stuff and playing the mandolin under the window, and that's what the troubadours in those pictures look like, or I'm thinking of the Robin Hood minstrels.
Right. And those aren't the ones the ladies really want.
No. Because
like I always say,
they're always the messengers
they're the Justin
of the king
Biebers of the Renaissance. That they're not remembered.
Yeah, because that's what they're doing.
And the Justin
Biebers
Biebers won't be remembered 500 years from now.
Unless he has a duel with somebody.
Well, I think it's like there's something about that I at least come from as an astrologer and think like who's remembered is like the people who really go against the grain. And there's something about chivalry where there's a protecting because there's some outside force that's not in alignment with God or duty or in alignment, and to maybe help, because I think you're right, like it could be looked at as anti-feminist, but it's quite opposite. I don't know if you could show my pictures. Is it working now or no?
Oh no.
Oh. Really?
Well, we had that picture in the other room of Lancelot. We can run and grab
shows
it.
I'm on Mac Mini, but
Oh no, we shouldn't have planned so many pictures.
I
this
know.
time.
Well, especially talking about chivalry and duels, and
I know.
really, it's not. There's none of it's working. Scan, not like scan that one.
None of your computers are even showing up.
Well, I mean, I could talk.
But I was going to go into that. It's that there's some opposing force that's not good, or that's bad, right? Like people forget with the Lancelot story, it was that King Arthur tried to kill Guinevere,
right,
and tied her up, which I have pictures of, but tied her up
Just
and was
explain
going to
it.
light her on fire like a witch. And
Well-
Lancelot came and beat down other knights of the Round Table and swooped her up and saved her, and then took him to his own castle. And then there's two stories, whether it was not Henry, whether it was, maybe Henry was Arthur, who knows? But Arthur that comes over and apologizes, but also at the same time is mad and wants to start a fight with Lancelot at the castle, or that they just got word and a message was sent by a page to come back and that he was sorry. And then
Yeah.
they both realized, what else do we have? Where are we going to go? What do we have? Like, you're a queen and I'm the head of the knight. I like my quest and I like you. And then they decide to have a secret chivalrous relationship.
right.
But that's the irony, is that it's like he's her protector from Arthur ever doing that again, right? And she also honors him and makes him, even though he's a knight, more of a knight because she knights him,
Right.
right? And so there's that other code of honor. But then the irony is, on the Grail quest, Lancelot gets to the front doors of the quest to where the Holy Grail is, and the angels don't let him in because he's not pure enough. And then it's his son, who he doesn't have with Guinevere, that he has with Elaine, and Elaine tricks him by using a potion that makes her look and actually mimic Guinevere to where you wouldn't know. They congregate that night, and then
Congregate.
and that becomes Sir Gawain, and Galahad, and Galahad's the one who goes on the quest and actually gets there. And that's the interesting part to me, is that if I look at today's society, it's like, things happen all for really weird reasons, but there's something about the story of staying on the straight and narrow path, and staying in good energy with the Lord, and staying in good energy with fending off the dark things that come at us, but that there is no excuse in the end to cause these shadows or these darker places, that it doesn't work out good in the end. Like, if you're not, it's chivalrous to end a relationship if you're not happy, instead of go off and do
You're
another
stuck
one.
to it because you made this
Yeah.
oath, and that's it, right? And then,
Like Henry at least did that.
yeah. It's like, yeah.
I mean, because if he did follow it, he would have known, and he probably
Yeah.
read Dante, that even Dante, oh gosh, he closes the book. Like, I can't even look at that. Even though it's so tantalizing or so wow. But it's kind of interesting that the battles of, sure, there's battles between guys and which girl there is, or even girls and to go over guys, but that's really not the story usually in the ancient stories. It's much more of, once you find a connection with somebody, it's whether or not it's on an ethical and you're conducting yourself in the right way. And I think that's the whole story of the Holy Grail, is that it's the holiness within you and the Grail is pure, and the pureness that you continue with yourself, and that you don't want to taint that. And it doesn't matter, because I think that story kind of brought out a kind of a weird way of, like, if you think about back then, if you were, a bastard, right? You were a bastard child because you weren't the child that was actually of the monarch or of somebody that was of high esteem, right? Because in many ways, Elaine is not the great love of Lancelot. He loved her, but he loved Guinevere more, right? So it's like, it's not like he expects that much out of Galahad, but Galahad, even as a bastard in many ways, even though he's not a bastard because he's actually, Elaine was the wife of Lancelot, is the pure one. So it's like also another way to look at it that way. Because I think that when you think of love and chivalry today, people will be like, well, you have kids, so I don't know. No. And then there's people who have kids, and then another person, my kids might be divorced, and they find the situation, they love it. Like people create a lot of stigma around, other people, and there's no difference to me of like, that kid's a bastard in the old days. Right. To like, well, that person's tainted, they had a kid, or that person's tainted, they've been divorced, they've never had kids, or that person's been divorced 3 times. It's like, as long as you're pure of heart and you're a good person and you didn't do anything that's out of alignment, that's where people are kind of missing the mark of what chivalry teaches and how people really show up to people. And you don't know the crazy stories that go on. It's like, was Lancelot a fully bad guy? Well, I mean, he did save Guinevere, but that's where she should have said, I'm done being your queen. But she probably was afraid that might cause a war with France. Or, I mean, back then, if she went with Lancelot and Lancelot was like, yeah, we're going back home to my homeland of France.
Well, there's no happy ending to that story. And I guess that's the appeal of the story.
Well, the tragedy is that Camelot falls because of that being discovered by Arthur, which makes him weak and makes him feel betrayed. And that's when Mordred comes in, and Mordred wants to take the throne from him. And because Arthur's so weak and he's so heartbroken that his best friend, his loyal knight, he looks at to him more than a brother, like a higher than a brother, whatever that would be, and his wife, and he finds that out. And then they both go tragic and go, we love Arthur. And then Mordred takes over and kills Arthur and takes over. And it's a horrible, destructive, and Camelot is destroyed after that point. So Guinevere goes and says, I'm going to do my penitence and I'm going to go be a nun. And she spends the rest of her life as a nun. And then Lancelot goes off into the forest, and that's where I did a past life regression and didn't know about Lancelot, had a trans channeler tell me it was Lancelot, went through that, didn't even know who this guy was or the story, and went out into the woods for 30 years, and that's where Merlin was. And Merlin had the Lady of the Lake is who took Lancelot from his family at birth to Camelot. And it was really all that story was about understanding how to do the spiritual work. And then that's where, for 30 years, Lancelot learns how to do astrology and magic and all these things.
Right. I mean, isn't it interesting that
that's my version that I went through the past life regression.
Yeah, well, I like that version. I accept that version of it, because the thing is that the stories are about the spiritual side of it, right? Because And what's interesting is that we like to think of the past as being a time where everything was about whatever the church was saying was how you
gospel
receive redemption or whatever, or absolution or whatever the right word is. But really, all of these stories that kind of borrowed from the Christian belief of the time they're full of, they have a lot of lessons as well. And, you know, like the codes of honor for all of these things, it's not like it's good, because I mean, the code of chivalry also led to crusades where not everything was always good that happened, right? Or
Not at all,
a
yeah.
lot of things that are not good happen in those, in the name of honor, right? Like we were just looking at All Quiet on the Western Front, and
Oh.
all those soldiers were sent off to war to defend the honor of their country. And it went bad where it was like, if we retreat, that's the worst thing we could do. That's dishonorable. But it was like they weren't looking at the context of the time, thinking, this doesn't make sense with machine guns, right?
Or yeah, that was when they were doing the armistice to end the war with France. It was like, let's not take this deal. It's better for us to not take it and let our men just get slaughtered and die in honor.
Right.
Right? Where it was like, you're just going to kill every man that's everlasting for the country to even keep a country, to like, there's going to be no men left.
So that's why I
Like-
think these stories aren't meant, or the stories or the codes, I guess, it's not meant to always be the same all the time. It's not meant to be a rigid story. And
Well,
that's
and
why they
that's kind
shift
of-
so much throughout
It's kind of what
time.
leads to Adolf Hitler. He's so bent because of that, because he was
Because of
in
the
World
Treaty
War
of
One.
Versailles, yeah.
And he thought that treaty and and what's funny when you watch that new version of All Quiet on the Western Front, really makes you think like that was actually a good thing that happened to save the men of Germany from all dying, because they were just getting slaughtered, right? But to Adolf Hitler, that was weak, you know.
Right.
And that they,
You
and
had-
that-
yep.
and they were all old timers and they didn't know what they were doing and they didn't know how to do it all. And he plants an insurrection and then gets a lot of people and they do it. And then everybody backs out. And then he's at the center of that and goes to jail and writes Mein Kampf and comes back. And even through 17 to 20 different political parties, gets it to where finally by the early 30s, it's down to, he gets a law, he gets in a place to where the Nazi party becomes in the top parties and they only are down to like 4 or 5 that he gets, I think it was like, I don't know who was in the what were they called? The weird guys with the Prussian, the Kaisers, like to get rid of so many political parties.
Right.
So his can get up higher. And then we'll just make him vice chancellor because he's so popular. And that's
Yeah.
just how Aaron Burr got into vice president and how the old way was. Think about that.
Well, then maybe Hamilton was right that he should have not allowed him to get into more power.
Right. Well, then he
right?
should have shot him back.
That's right.
But
So
I
something was wrong
guarantee
with
you
that.
that he did shoot, and I guarantee you he totally was a bad shot. Because I used to teach in all my schools about Mars and especially Sag, right? Like the archer can aim, but it never can hit the target. Our beliefs never hit a target in life, right? They always have to change course. But our beliefs are what let us aim high in life and have hope. But the hope is never exactly what the receiving end is. Sometimes it could be better, sometimes it could just be different. But it never hits the target. And especially when you have the wildness of a centaur, which is a half man and a half horse, aiming. Imagine being on 4 limbs as a horse, but with the top half as being a human and trying to aim with 4.
Right.
It's not stable. So Mars and Sag never hits its target. It can't hit its target. And that's also,
So-
if you read in medieval astrology or ancient astrology, it's a position where it's one for using for rallying up hope, like Alexander Hamilton did in papers, but not good on a battlefield.
So that would have been
Not
even,
strategic, not...
Yeah, so
yeah.
probably Aaron Burr would have been the better choice for the strategic, you know, who's going to be working with the general. I don't know the names, all the things. Like, all I know is on Alexander Hamilton's tomb, I think they call him general. Was he a general or no? Or
Hamilton?
yeah,
I know
What
he was.
was his position?
He was a high-ranking officer. He might have been like a brigadier general. He was.
So I mean, he is chosen for that position where it probably wasn't his ideal position, right? Burr was probably better suited for that, and then he ended up in a different position. So
Right.
but I'm wondering.
He was a major general.
Okay.
Yeah. I knew he wasn't a general. He wasn't a general like Washington.
Right, but I just thought it was interesting. I was looking at his tomb, a picture of it, to see what was written on his tomb, how he was
But he would have been in all of the big meetings in the tents with Washington, and they, major generals would have moved troops and would have been in charge of strategies of supplies and getting everybody to get it all done for the generals. Like major generals, definitely not a small ranking. They're senior officers. So, but he was in the battles of some of the biggest parts of the wars, the White Plains War, the Battle of Trenton and Princeton. So he was in the northern territories with Washington, not the southern ones. And the southern ones are the ones that are featured in the Patriot. That they kept Cornwallis from going north.
Do you think that when you look at Hamilton's chart, was that in his destiny that he should have done that, or no?
Yeah, having Venus retrograde in Capricorn with Saturn, and for it to come finally direct at 23 years old, which if he was born in 55 and the war started when he was 21, and at 23, 2 years into the war, he's a major general. Like he was in the militia for the first year and then got put into the actual Continental Army in 1777 and through 1782. And that was the war. And so that's where he finally sees his. So it's really actually the war of where he sees this, but he was a general, major general. He wasn't like a on the ground killing other soldiers.
Yeah.
Like Aaron Burr, who was on the ground more. And that's what you see with like, a good example is Top Gun, right? So it's like they shoot down planes, right? They're in strike fighter squadrons. But I was in the Navy and I was on F-18s. And so guess what? Those captains that run those they're pilots themselves, but they've been pilots for 20 years usually, and then they become captain and they become the strike fighter squadron commanders. But when you actually get to the lieutenants and you get to the lower ranking officers who are flying the jets, those guys they're young, but they, like everything is done for them. All of the enlisted guys like me, we're the ones turning the jets, making sure they're good. They just go into flight, meetings and keep training of understanding things. And then they just like get in their suits and then they just walk out. They're not on the line much. They're not out in the hangar much.
Right.
And then they just get in the jet, do their thing, come back. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to do anything except fly, shoot, and get back down. And it's like an athlete today, right? Like they don't have to pick up a cup of trash. The water boy does,
Yeah.
So if you think about it, Alexander Hamilton probably had a collection of guns more than he fired, Where Aaron Burr probably never talked about the secret stuff that he had to do to get info back and forth. Because if you got caught, you were hung by the British right away for treason. Where the chivalry of the war was, let's say Cornwallis, if you got captured as a major general, would you like to file a form of grievance?
Yeah. Huh.
And then it would have been, you would have been treated as a prisoner of war, and you would have been able to file a grievance. Like, yes, my quarters are not that great. Oh, okay, well, I'll make sure that you get a little bit more orange juice this morning. That's the difference.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
It's just, to me, it's interesting how we connected dueling, right? The whole code of dueling and the Hamilton and Burr duel with chivalry, because really it comes out of that tradition of chivalry, which is all about having codes of honor and appropriate behavior and having allegiance to something greater than yourself that helps you strive to become a better person. So that idea, connecting it to how it spins out in something like the military, where you have codes of honor because you just need to have codes so that the whole system can go, because fighting a war is unruly. You've got all those things.
You sound like Cornwallis now.
Do I? It's quite
well, because it was our
unruly.
militia that started taking out their
Yes.
their officers, because without officers, then the troops
Right.
don't know what to do.
Exactly, because you're so
Right.
schooled in
Right.
the code of conduct.
Right. But I would-
And
yeah.
that's something that can hold things in place, but then I don't know, like you're not adaptable. In the end, you can't shoot the target, or you've got your big ideas, but what are you doing with them?
Well, in the case of Hamilton, I think the problem was he was such a man of chivalry, but it's like in football, if it was the Super Bowl and the other team was you were winning and you were like feeling bad, I'm gonna just spike the ball and let them have the ball or something. Like, what? Like, so it's like you go to a duel and that's the gentleman thing. The code is to actually do it, not to do the whole, I'm higher and above this, so I'm going to fire off into the tree.
Right.
That's actually the opposite of what you would do. So his issue was finding an excuse to not do it by being more chivalrous than the other person. But you can't, there's no such thing as being more chivalrous. You're either chivalrous or you're not. There's no in between, right? So that's where you see also at the same time, like, why the American Revolution was won, because unfortunately, like, the British, oh, my red coat outfit hasn't been changed, right? Where it's like, the militia of America, or the Continental Army and the militia of just, you can't even call them Americans because they weren't technically,
Right.
right? That they were colonialists that fought with pitchforks and fought with guns that were taken from a dead person that was probably found in a field of a farm. Like, and you went for it, and that you didn't go, I'm really chivalrous, I'm not going to shoot that person. Like, no. Right? Like that's, it's very controversial, but with the whole Biden leaving Afghanistan thing, right? Like, that was not chivalrous for the code of the conduct of how we should let out, because think of all of the women. Like, we set up in Afghanistan to where women could walk around and they could do so many of the things that they weren't able to do before, even though I don't agree with the war. But as the president, you take that on if we're going to leave, right? They had brought it down to a certain amount of troops, but you just don't pick up and leave and let the Taliban take all the things and then act like you did a good deed when
Right.
now all the women there don't have a say anymore. The Taliban runs the country. There is no government anymore. There is no Afghanistan Republic anymore. There's no more president. It is the Taliban, right? So now all that 20 years of fighting and $2 trillion just went to Biden doing I'm just going to shoot up into the tree in that duel, right? And actually the Americans that died, the 13 Americans that died, and then we shot back at that one family and killed them, and it was just water jugs. It wasn't anything else in the
Right.
back with that drone strike we did. That's not chivalrous at all. That's sloppiness, and that's trying to be some other thing, which is what Alexander Hamilton did. Tried to be some other thing that's out. There is a boundary even in chivalry that you That'd be like jousting and being like, that's what I hate to say it, but that's what a weak person or a pussy would do, right? Like, I pulled my joust up because I wanted to be nice to the other guy, and then you get hit hard and then try to do the weak, oh, but I was trying to be nice. Mm-hmm. Like.
Right. Well, even with when Henry VIII got hit that first time, where he wasn't dazed and the other guy didn't mean to hit him, he got up and it was all okay because he wasn't going to sit there and say,
chivalry.
You don't hit the king, right? It was no, we're participating in this sport and we're following these rules.
Right.
Because that's what Henry VIII, that's actually what the Renaissance era was. There were so many books being printed of codes of conduct and people finding out for the first time that you could kind of like talk about your identity, forming your identity. The Renaissance was the time when people are recognizing I can build my identity to be something else or something better than what I am. And there were codes of conducts printed in books for all sorts of things. Like if you think about Machiavelli's book, The Prince, that's all about how do you be the best prince you could be, right? Or there was a book called The Courtier by Castiglione, I can never say his name correctly, that was extremely popular that all sorts of people could buy, and it talked all about how do you relate to women of this type or men of this type or servants, or what games do you need to know how to play. It actually has something about dueling in it too, but of course it would be dueling with swords,
right?
Which we didn't even talk about, but I mean, there's so many aspects to
or even
to that.
King James and his demonology, the rules of understanding
how to persecute witches.
To
unearth
and then
heresy.
this is actually the Bible with his King James Bible, like right?
Yeah,
like
lots of understanding of printing your word,
Right.
printing the word, so people have a conduct or a manual for how to behave.
Even we just did Nostradamus in 1555. His preface was to his son, but to the reader as this is. It's more than prophecy. It's understanding how to. That one day some people will get it finally, but it's going to be a long time till people understand the Almighty and understand the crazy and amazing spectacle that there is of this universe and how it's connected to events and timings and all these things, but that most people won't get it, and the men of numbers won't get it, or men of letters won't get it. Or John Dee and his great work and his libraries and other. It was a time where finally people could start getting some really crazy, interesting thought. Because in the medieval days, it was like, wow, that's a pig. It came from where?
Right.
Like, wow, that's a sword. Like, it took me 10 years to get to where I could make a sword like this. It was blacksmith or something. That's where the chivalry is in the higher upper classes, I guess, in that medieval time, because if you were in the in the vulgar, which was the understanding of the name of common folk.
Right.
If you were in the vulgar, it was because you weren't chivalrous and you didn't know how to be chivalrous, and that's at the pubs, and they would just grab women and do whatever they wanted, and that you didn't want to turn into the vulgar even by not knowing the spiritual understandings deeply too. And the chivalry is in that too, where it's a code of conduct, but it's also in what you wear and how you dress and how you get together. We're in medieval times. Come on, honey, get out of that bed.
Well, yeah. It was more about survival, and you're procreating, so you have enough kids to help you maintain the farm, right? It's not I need to have a male heir because I want to make sure my lineage is established and that we can really go down into history as the new King Arthur or what new Camelot.
Right.
Right? So
Which, yeah, that's a weird story because there is no heir that comes about to save Camelot or anything like that.
No, and everything always still worked out, right? Like that's the lesson from
Yeah.
history is like
It
we're
all
always
worked out.
waiting for something else. We have handbooks for all sorts of things, and now here we are. Like that's what I was thinking actually is for Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, there were conduct manuals on how you do a duel, but in the end, whatever happened, and one of them turned out to be a better shot than the other, right?
Well, there was
And the-
paces that you took back then,
Yeah.
and that there was also observers, and that had to be show up at dawn.
So they did do all those things,
Yeah.
and they had the right pistols, and
that's where the story to me is weird. I'm going to just shoot up and he won't shoot me. Like that just sounds like that's the story you say when I die because I'm not a good shot.
well, he would have been really aware of how he's remembered. So,
Correct.
and you have a long time to die. It's not like you got shot and it was a machine gun, right? He didn't die until either the next day or 2 days later. So you have
Right.
plenty of time to say, wait a second.
Right.
Don't record what actually happened. This is what you need to write down, right? I shot in
Right.
the air. I didn't want to kill my fellow
Because it's about-
Revolutionary War veteran or
It's
whatever.
about, at the end of the day, whether it's pride or it's duty or as a man, that's the whole thing, right? If today's society, and that's why they looked up to guys like Andrew Tate, younger men, or men look up to Jordan Peterson, right? Because they talk about responsibility of being a man and that it's a good thing to be responsible. It's a good thing to not be at the club every night and just slopping away, even though Andrew Tate was a little bit more that way. I would say
then-
Jordan Peterson's a better example.
Yeah.
And actually has his psychology not only degree but also is a doctorate in psychology, and he's
Well, he's taking
data and facts and he
but
studies
stories too, right?
and
He
stories.
does he do the Bible
He
sometimes?
breaks down
or-
Pinocchio to the Bible to everything.
And he's trying to pull out what are the lessons about human interaction from
Yeah.
these stories, but they're not necessarily just codes of conduct. It's like
But he calls it responsibility, which, right? Like to me, it's duty, right? It's like a man without duty or purpose, and that happens every day. Like you might be successful, but we see that in celebrity culture today, right? Like look at what's his name, Matthew from Friends, that just Matthew Perry
Perry.
in his book that just came out, and how he was taking up to 55 Vicodin a day. Right? In his battle with drugs, he's been to like 2,500 AA meetings, something crazy like that. And that he was going to open houses. And he said when he saw it was an old couple, he knew for sure it was a score. And he'd go up and check the master bedroom and look in the medicine cabinet and take all their pills. And he's like, they won't think that Chandler took all this. So when you don't live with, so you could be successful, but he lost his sense of duty and responsibility, and that's where you end up. That there's something about courage too with it all too, right? That you have to show up every day. In this reality, Matthew Perry tonight said on Bill Maher, he said, reality is an acquired taste, and I did not know how to acquire that taste for my whole life until just recently. And so it's about that every day reality is an acquired taste. Like cigarettes are an acquired taste. Alcohol I don't drink anymore, but I remember nobody likes your first drink of alcohol. It tastes like crap, but it becomes an acquired taste. Reality itself is not an easy thing, no matter how prestigious you are as a monarch, or if you're at the bottom of you're in the rivers of India right now. Like it's an acquired taste for us all. And it's those that acquire the taste and continue to acquire the taste every day. That the chivalry is whether or not you start spitting out the reality. Like that's really the core of it. And that's from a male or a female perspective. It doesn't matter. Because you can't, every day is a new day. And so yesterday is yesterday. And so it's always that this moment and how you deal with it now. You could be the greatest of anything of all time, or as they say in today's culture, GOAT, right? The greatest of all time. That don't matter though if you chuck the reality out, or you don't have a duty or responsibility in your life. And that's where I think, it's easy to see, like, if you're signing up for a duel, well, then you do everything you can to win that duel.
Right.
You don't take the death and make a story that you shot up in the air.
Well, what's interesting about that to me is, like, he thought he had to tell the story that way. That if we think of it that way, that if it didn't really happen that way, and he had time to think about how he was going to be remembered or how the duel would be remembered, something in him thought, all right, as Alexander Hamilton, I need to tell this story in a way that's going to be a lesson or a morality lesson for the future.
Right.
So he doesn't want to be remembered as the guy who tried to shoot his friend, old friend, or whatever. His friend.
Well, no, I look at it as he's a ex-U.S. Army senior officer of the Revolutionary War, and he was in the military again before 1800, from 1798 to 1800. He served under the new Federalist Constitutional Republic. Mm-hmm. But that would have been an embarrassment. And if he was truly chivalrous, like Henry VIII would have been to one of the guys who knocked him off his horse in a joust, he would have said, that was a good shot by Aaron Burr. Not, I was aiming another direction. A chivalrous person would have said that was a good thing and don't worry about it. It's okay because we agreed to this. These are the common rules, right? Not, he made the story about his own self. That's always the story of a weakling.
Well, and he's going against the code by telling the story, right? Like, Aaron Burr is proceeding by, here's the gentlemanly thing to do. So I don't know. It's interesting.
It sounds political too, right?
Yeah.
The vice president of the United States killed me, and I'm a threatening force to him.
Everybody will always know he's disgusting and not appropriate for any office.
Right.
Yeah.
And in many ways, then it also, Jefferson is the one who has to deal with that, and Jefferson has to let go of Aaron Burr for sure. So
it's so strange. Have you been to Monticello ever? Have you gone? Because I don't know if you know this. I think it's something that everybody learns, but when you walk into Monticello, there's two busts, one on each side of the door, and one is Aaron Burr and one is Alexander Hamilton, looking at each other in Jefferson's home. Like, he wanted to remember his two adversaries or whatever. And I always thought that's interesting.
yeah, it is.
That he deliberately made a decision to be remembered in that way himself, as somebody who had those two around him, as if he's getting, but remember, he's the Pluto Scorpio in the bunch, I think. I
Right.
remember. So I don't know what he was thinking.
I mean, that's the problem with the Pluto Sag generation, is they feel like they're part of the belief system, but they served at the tables instead of got waited. Like they didn't.
Yeah.
They were servers. They were not.
So
They were not.
look-
They were not.
Right.
They were not served.
So look who was left president of the
Right.
United States.
Correct.
While those two did
Right.
some kind of dirty work, right?
Right. And that's what's kind of interesting, is they're mid Pluto Sages. So still at that time, even after that duel, a Pluto Sag is not president. So they serve, but they don't. They're not the commander that's remembered. You know, they're not the.
Except for Lafayette.
Yeah, that's true. But he's
was.
French.
And he went back home, and he was an aristocrat at the wrong time, and things were a little crazy.
But that's where, and that's kind of crazy, tying up that one episode we did of the generations. The Pluto Sag generation are serving the pandemic right now in a weird way. Mm-hmm. And they're serving this new world. And when they get to a place where they feel they can do what they believe, there's some force. That's the lesson of Pluto, is the evolutionary process is through the failure and the tragedy. And in that case, it's the belief or the hope. In Scorpio's case, it's I'm going to have this, I'm going to receive this. And you might receive it, but it might not be what you thought. Jefferson received being president, but had to deal with that and many other things that he didn't want to do. Or Pluto Libra is like Washington. Oh gosh, I've got these great guys who are generals with me. And oh wait, one of them's a traitor? You know, because Benedict Arnold was a general. So that was the biggest treasonous, traitorous act to ever happen. Is he also was setting it up to where that they could capture Washington in a way, right? So that's Pluto Leo, right? Tragedy of relationship, right? And there was also tragedy of relationship because Washington, none of them could come together, even for the Declaration in Philadelphia. They had to get all 13 colonies to sign off first, then get them all and delegate for a declaration. And then, okay, everybody's agreed. And he got thrown as the commander of the Continental Forces in 1775 before that even happened. So he got thrown that because of John Adams, right? John Adams was like, yeah, you're going to do this. We all nominate you. And Benjamin Franklin, we're nominating you. And he's like, okay. And then he has to have also that relationship through becoming the first president at the first Congress, which was very small, and it was in New York City, and then having to take on this country that's got Articles of Confederation that they don't think is strong enough, and then having to go in there and wrangle everybody together as president to try and figure out a constitutional convention and get them to all agree, and the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, and then, okay, we got that figured out, and here's the Capitol, and here's my farewell address. Like his relationship probably suffered in many different ways, you know, from that.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's interesting too when we think about the time that the duel happened in 1804, and it was Pluto Pisces, right?
Right.
So are we sort of seeing, like, is that a
and that would have been Pluto square the
way?
Pluto of both of them. Which, like, Pluto Librans right now are finishing their Pluto square, like me, which is mine's coming exact here in the next couple months. But
don't get the dueling pistols out.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one part of it, but it's Pluto Libra, right? So that's Washington. Like, gosh, is there anybody that gets it? You know, especially if you think of his farewell address after that in Pluto Aquarius, which was about being careful of America becoming allies with people, that staying as a neutral country. That was his major warning. Because if you befriend somebody too much, then that creates an enemy, right? And our government today doesn't even listen to that. So they still, like Washington with his wood tooth and wooden teeth and everything, he's still to this day rattling. They just don't, nobody gets it. Nobody got it in the war. Nobody got it nobody gets it. About treaties, about fairness. It's always the unfair situations. And it probably felt like an unfair situation for Washington. But Washington was very chivalrous to still take it. Who else was going to take it? He was a British officer. He understood the British commands. He understood all the way to do it. And he knew how to, he was a captain in the British military and the British army. So that's a very high ranking position. He would have had a horse. He would have had an ability to know how to battle and know how to get men together. And he was doing that. So in the French Indian War, he would have understood the craziness of how to deal with any situation. Where none of them were. It's not like Benjamin Franklin would have. And any of those Pluto Sages at 20 didn't know nothing.
Right.
Right? So, and then the Pluto Scorpios are just kind of fighting for scraps. That's what they do. They fight for scraps.
But they come out and
Because
Thomas Jefferson came out in a good place at that point, right? So
Yeah, but that's where he also, again, why wasn't he there to do something about it? His vice president is out there doing a duel.
Right.
He should have been there like, hey, can we solve this really quick? But that's why I say they fight for scraps. Pluto Librans fight for diplomacy and have elegant. Libra's an elegant sign. Once you go to Scorpio, elegance is gone. There's nothing elegant in Scorpio. It's darkness, or it's seductive, and there's manipulation, and there's all these deeper things and desires and needs and wants, right? But in Libra, it's pretty. It's like that's why if you go to the first Congress on Wall Street, it's like that's the only place in New York City besides the Trinity Church. It's a beautiful, elegant thing in the middle of all the crazy stock market and all the stuff that's going on Wall Street and all the stuff by Trinity Church is beautiful. There's an elegant part that Pluto Librans bring, but Pluto Scorpios bring ugly situations that they have to deal with, including the vice president just shot fucking the other fucking candidate. Right? That no matter what, a Pluto Scorpio can never escape the dark shit that comes into attraction. That's the transformational of evolutionary astrology. Or a Pluto Sag, their hopes, their dreams, their beliefs, their educational understanding of what to do, it never is what it is. Even in Aaron Burr's case too, right? Like he really believed he was going to be the leader of the party. He really believed that he was going to be the president. He really believed, and he didn't. And he wasn't happy being vice president. So he got right there. Jupiter gets you right there. Hey, be grateful. Nah, not good enough. It's never good enough for Pluto Sag. So that's the Pluto stuff. And Henry was Pluto because he was born during the times of that. If I'm correct about Henry, he was which we never did.
Yeah, we never looked at his chart.
I will do him really quick because that's the cool part of it is that we were in the same timing as then too. Open, and I've got all the royals here, and we've got Henry. Oh yeah, Tudor Henry. Here we go. Tudor. Oh, King Henry the 8th, the 6th, 8th. And he was Pluto in Libra, 29, like me.
Uh-oh.
No wonder I love Henry the 8th, and I have paintings of him in my house. I'm the only person who probably has paintings of Henry the 8th in my house. We have the same Pluto, the same degree. But elegance and the fields of cloth and the elegance that he brought and the niceness, a Pluto Scorpio king would not have any of that. It would be dark castle because they don't care about a nice thing. That's why if you even see here, I've got plants. I think about all these things all the time.
I wonder if Queen Mary the First was Pluto Scorpio.
Yeah, Bloody Mary.
Mm-hmm. Was she?
Yeah.
Was she? I mean, because that would just be too appropriate for this. And then I wanted to see also if Henry had other things that were similar with either Hamilton or Burr. So, yeah, Henry Mary the First.
Yeah, I'm looking. Yeah, 1516. She actually was Pluto Capricorn. She was during the right before the Saturn Pluto. So it would have been like being born in 18, right when Saturn came into Capricorn and Pluto, or at the end of 2017 when Pluto was in Capricorn, Saturn was about to come in, but she's Saturn Sag, so she would have been like 2017 energy if she was born in 2017.
Well, she's a chart for another show.
She does have Mars in Capricorn though, with her Pluto. It's an extreme Mars Pluto thing. And she was a Pisces with Neptune in Aquarius with Mercury conjunct her Neptune. Oh God. That's kind of a delusion, Especially
she
Pluto.
did think she was pregnant.
Yeah,
first.
Pluto crossed her when she was young. She was insane. She probably went through insanity.
Hmm. Wow. And okay, so back to Henry VIII. What other aspects does he have in his chart that are they similar at all to any of the other people we looked at?
Wow, him and I have like the same astrology. He's Neptune and Sag like me too. He's North Node Sag. He's got Mars in Virgo. He's a Virgo rising. And he's got Jupiter. He's a Cancer, but he has Jupiter in Gemini. No, they have nothing. Nothing in common. Moon in Aries. Sun, Moon square. Mercury in Leo, though.
Well,
No wonder I like him. He actually has Venus conjunct his South Node at 0 degree of Gemini. So he definitely, his relationships were the issue. It was when the best stuff he did was leave the church and and he should have, and I know he did bring out, because there was the Geneva Bible, and then that's what they were kind of using. But wasn't there a Bible that he kind of stamped approval on for the Church of England?
He had the Great Bible.
Yeah. So the North Node and Sag, that's what he should have just done. Kept with staying on the expansion of his church. But he would get like a little dog, I always call the Gemini energy, that's excited about anything, about relationships and especially money and vanity, but just really quick and get over it.
And that is
but not even relatable to Alexander Hamilton or to Aaron Burr. Not even.
But he's Pluto Sag, the same.
He's Pluto Libra.
Pluto Libra. And that's the Renaissance era then too. Pluto Libra. That just makes so much sense. It's so interesting.
And to have this same alignment would have been, you'd had to have been born in June and July of 84. No joke, because Pluto retrograded back into Libra and was the last moment of it, just like Henry VIII. So actually, Henry VIII and I are extremely similar. But I don't cut chicks' heads off. So, you know, he had Uranus and Saturn and Taurus.
You haven't yet.
Oh, geez.
You haven't executed any yet. But of course, you're also not the king of the country. You're just the Leo king. So
that's true.
We'll have to think about other ways you might be like Henry VIII. But, I mean, what's interesting is, had he not fallen off of the horse the second time, he may not have gone in that direction, right? So...
Right. But I could see his a love for chivalry with Mercury and Leo. That's the mind is obsessed with love and royalty and regality. And that's what I have, and that's like I got lions sitting here, and I've got knights sitting behind me. You know, so the mind it's positive too. You know, he was known as a funny guy. He was known as a good king to his knights. Yeah,
he was. He definitely had that.
He liked to play games too. That's a Leo thing.
Yeah, I mean, he was, like I said, he was of the Renaissance, and he did everything that was supposed to be cool at the time. Like,
he's opposite of Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. Opposite. Even his sun placement and his Mercury, everything's opposite.
Well, that's really interesting too, because they were establishing a governmental system where they got rid of a king, right? So you would expect that.
Right. But I would say that the transits that Aaron Burr and that Alexander Hamilton were born at is they just kept scrapping for, you know, they got put into a new system and were born in from an old system at a young age. Whereas like Henry was right at the right time and got to be the one that changed it. The Pluto Librans get to change the system.
It's funny because he's like George Washington was too.
They're
right?
old enough to be at the place when it changes. You know? And it's when the Saturn Pluto comes, which for Henry that was 1517. He was born in 1491, so he was in his late 20s, mid to late 20s. So, and he had Saturn Aquarius, which we're in now. So when he had a Saturn return, he was there when the transit we all just went through in 2020 happened. Imagine being a Pluto Sag, they're getting out of high school, or they're going into middle school right now.
And he was having to get married to his brother's wife at that age.
Right. They don't have, yeah. It's like the Pluto Librans, if we now start to really look at it, or the Pluto Leos, and the Pluto Virgos kind of stay out of it.
I'm seeing that.
And the Pluto Librans are the ones that get remembered, and maybe that's why, because Pluto's at its shortest distance in Libra. So
it spends the
shortest amount of time in Libra. So it's the rarest Pluto.
Well, he certainly made a lot of changes.
And it does, from what I'm seeing in history, is one of the weirdest Pluto transits of coming into Scorpio, its home sign, and then going, okay, I got a little bit of that, but I'm coming back into Libra for just a little second, and then, all right, let's go into Scorpio. And Pluto likes to do that, but when it's in its home sign of Scorpio and coming back into Libra, where it gets to taste the elegance again a little bit and the beauty before it goes back into the dark depths. There's something unique about understanding the darkness, but knowing how to bring the elegance to it that Pluto Libra knows, that no other sign can understand.
And you will have your Pluto progress, or
it already progressed to Scorpio.
Into Scorpio?
Yeah. And I died. I don't know how I didn't die, but I blew up a car and walked out of a firing car. Well, you were here for that, so.
Yep. What age would have Henry been when his?
Well, his was retrograde, so.
Oh, so yeah.
I'll know right now. I'm fascinated. That just made me. I don't know why I'm all giddy. I'm all fuck yeah, dude. Like no wonder I thought you were the man, bro.
I'm not going to tell Sophia that your chart's like Henry VIII.
I think it's awesome. Like
as long as she can be Jane Seymour,
right? Like. Well, I'm going to do 1518 when he would have that Saturn Pluto, and he would have had his. Oh, so he had his Pluto progress direct when he was 2 years old. So Pluto was stopped and then went direct when he came in. That's like a lot of June and early July 1984s. Wow. And then by the time he does the schism and he's with Anne Boleyn and all that stuff in the 1530s, we'll do like 1534. Wait, why is it? Oh yeah, that's where I do it. Right here, 1534. His progressed moon was on his Pluto, like I just had in 1534. Wow. I feel a lot better about my own life. His progressed moon went into Scorpio, crossed his Pluto in December 11th, 1534. And that's when we're getting rid of this church. We're getting rid of all this stuff. Like that was when the dates we saw, the official dates of him really like putting it to the church through 1536. Like, aye.
Yeah, he was like, enough of this trying to diplomacy. We're just going to do it now.
We're just going to do it now.
And and that's when he would have made the break with the codes of conduct, right?
Yep. And it's weird because I think that's the date his progressed Venus conjuncted his Juno at that same time, and that would have been his great wife. So in 1534, I think it was Anne Boleyn.
Were they? I think 1536.
Or 15 or so. That's interesting. But he had met her during that time.
Yeah, they were already an item.
So that's Yeah, because in 1534 they started, and then finally the Laws and Wales Act of 1535 and 42 was the first English monarch to rule King of Ireland, and then
1534 is, oh yeah, he's already
right.
and they're married in 1533.
Oh, that's exactly when it conjuncted.
Wow, Princess Elizabeth was born in 1533, September. 1534, he passes the Act of Supremacy.
And that's the
So-
beginning.
He's the head of the Church of England at that point, and
I've done that with High Vibe. To the whole astrology mainstream and all this new age community, like, bye, this is doing our own thing.
and you've been excommunicated.
And I've been excommunicated.
Like Henry.
Uh-huh. I feel so much better.
You're establishing a new.
I wish we could have shown
thing.
it to people to prove it, but you can do it yourself if you look up Henry VIII.
Yes, this is everybody's exercise.
Do his
now
progressions for
is-
1534. And look at my chart.
That's just amazing. The
And like you'd be like,
progressions
wait,
thing.
what? That actually is exactly what just happened.
And your accident was the same time as his jousting accident, or no?
It
What?
would have been very close, yeah.
So we'll keep you off a horse for the next year.
And my teeth are, they're still here, but the wooden teeth are sounding pretty nice soon. So that's a Pluto Libra thing.
Hopefully not a regular Libra thing.
No, but this was fun. And I mean, we could talk about this forever, but I think it was interesting to look at it from a dual perspective, then to jousting, then to just chivalry itself, which I think this one's going to need another episode.
Yeah. I was thinking I'm going to have to post some of my things on the community thing in High Vibe or something.
I know.
Because I had other things. And
We have all these books. I have this 115-year-old book here with all these beautiful pictures and all these stories of the old romance, and it's just so awesome. I wish everybody could join us with it.
well, maybe that's something for the event on New
Yep.
Year's, David. Is
That's right.
We could do something with the books so they could actually see the books too.
I know. They could see. Yeah, well, I'm going to be offering, tours and a movie night in the theater here and all that kind of stuff. So,
It'll be fun.
and we're going to be having a lot people don't even know yet. We're coming up with so many cool things for New Year's. So, but, well, appreciate you, Anne.
I appreciate you too, Your Highness.
I'm just the astrologer.
You're just the Henry VIII and coming back to the
It
modern
just makes
day.
I've never looked at his chart like that. I was just like, whoa. Crazy.
All right, well.
Well, it is weird because this is true that in my family line, he knighted my 13th great grandfather.
And gave him the best monastery land
Yeah,
too.
gave him the best monastery land, and then he played dice and cards with him.
At the Field of Cloth of Gold,
And
right?
yeah, well,
I mean,
he
that's
served
the
him at the
craziest
Field of
thing.
Cloth of Gold.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's it. Wow.
he served him as a like a knight's servant. Like
Probably fulfilling a chivalrous role or something.
yeah, he's in the picture of them going to it. Like he was one of his servants, but he was also one of his servants so much so during his death that when it went to Charles to maintain that the Lady Jane, right? Lady Jane
Grey.
Jane Grey, he was part of that to maintain the Church of England, which he got killed, and he's, I think, number 10 after Anne Boleyn to be killed at the Tower of London.
Right.
Through Thomas Palmer. So anyway, makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
All right.
all right. We'll see you all on the next one, History in the Stars. Make sure you follow Anne at
The
History Anne. Love you all. Subscribe to High Vibe.
Bye.